Good morning, everyone. 1st February marks one of the most awaited days as the government unveils plans for steering the country to a new direction of growth and development. This year was no different, as all of us sat glued to our television sets, understanding and grasping the announcements being made by the Honorable Finance Minister as she unveiled the Union Budget 2025. The announcement in the budget seeks to address majority of the key areas and indeed looks promising, however, the complete impact and implication of the budget still remains to be understood. And today, as we embark on the journey of deciphering the budget 2025 together, it is a pleasure to welcome all of you to the session on Decoding the Union Budget 2025, organized by Scope in association with Deloitte. It is indeed encouraging to see the overwhelming response we have received today for the session, and to ensure that the benefit of the knowledge shared today reaches maximum number of people. The event is being telecasted live on the YouTube channel and social media handles of Scope as well. It is indeed a pleasure to have an eminent panel of experts with us who have joined us to demystify the budget. We welcome you all, sir, and I request my colleagues to please welcome the guests with a token of our gratitude. We welcome Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy, an eminent economist and director, Madras School of Economics. We welcome him with a round of applause, please. Mr. Divya Baveja, partner Deloitte, who has been partnering with us every year. We welcome you, sir, with a token of our respect and gratitude. Yes. We also welcome our mentor, Mr. Atul Sopti, Director General Scope and Member Governing Body ILO. Yes, before we proceed with the program, I would like to invite Mr. Atul Sopti, Director General Scope, to please render his opening remarks. Sir, as we all know, is a visionary leader, having a versatile professional experience of over 4 decades. Before leading Scope as Director General, he was CMD BHEL, and given his successful election to the position of Member Governing Body ILO, it is indeed a privilege and prestigious position for all of us, as he represents the interest of global employers in the UN body. So over to you, sir, for your address.
A very good morning to all of you. Respected Professor Bhanumurthy ji, who is Director, Madras School of Economics, Mr. Divya Baveja, Partner Deloitte, esteemed speakers from the expert panel from Deloitte, directors from various public sector enterprises, all the participants who have joined in person as well as virtually. It's indeed a pleasure for me to be amongst all the experts and the experience as we are going to, as Samridhi said, demystify the union budget, which was announced on 1st of February. Because we feel that it's not just a financial statement, it's a reflection of nation's economic priorities, growth strategies, and policy directions. Basically, it affects everyone, whether it's a policy maker, businesses, and common men. Common men, I think our experts from Deloitte will dwell during the personal taxation area in a big way. So basically, we want to learn about the intricacy about this union budget today so that we take the decisions in an informed manner. That's very, very important thing, decision taking in the informed manner. And I'm very happy that somebody mentioned that enthusiastic participation, and we got requests from many quarters for online virtual participation also. And today we decided that it can be virtual transmission also. In fact, today you are going to gain insight into the government strategic priorities, long-term vision for the nation's growth. And you know that the past few decades, India has demonstrated its global capabilities. We have risen to the level of number 5 economy in the world, and very soon we are emerging to be among the top 3 economies of the world. That despite the pandemic which had happened in the recent past, despite the geopolitical uncertainties and intensification of protectionism, that you know that it's going up and up, but still we have outperformed in GDP growth all the major developed and developing economies. That's a matter of pride for ourselves, because we are emerging as a global player. I always mention that there was I worked in when I worked in BHEL in 90s. I was in international business. When we used to go for participation in any meetings or otherwise, we were not given that kind of respect, to be honest with you. There used to be time when they used to say how India can participate in the power project tender. I mean, we were looked down. That's a fact that I'm telling based on my own experience. Today, having got elected to the governing body of International Labour Organization, I see any word we speak in the international forum, that is heard. Whether it's from the government side, whether it's from the employer side or the employee side. We have reached to that level today. That's the reality, and I feel pride while sitting there that where this country has risen, and we are going up and up. We are embarking now today on the journey of Viksit Bharat as well as net zero. So we need to have the sustained growth is required. That's very, very important thing. Strategic policy direction is required, and inclusive environment and empowerment is required. So that in ILO, a term which is used quite often, you sit in the room and most of the people are talking about one sentence, that no one should be left behind. So that's very, very sorry. That's very, very important thing. We in fact normally submit a pre-budget memorandum to Government of India, the Honorable Finance Minister. We submit based on the inputs of all of you. We collect the inputs and then submit. I am very happy to see that my people have told me that some of the suggestions, inputs have found place in the final document, especially with respect to rationalization of TDS and TCS. So, in addition to that, we have been giving inputs to government, especially being part of the EPFO Board of Trustees as well as the ESI Board. Number of inputs we have given to them, which have been accepted or in the process of getting accepted. Only thing which we have not been successful so far is UPS, now higher pension scheme under the UPS 95, because despite my arguing a lot, they have, as of now, let's see what happens. As of now, they decided that exempted funds who don't have the rules to deduct beyond 15,000, they are not getting accounted for. Let's see, we are taking it forward. Coming back to this budget 2025, we have also studied in detail, but experts are there. Bhanumati is there, Deloitte, a big team is there. I mean, they will decodify all the announcements and share with you. But I feel that it talks of both the pillars of the growth, whether it prioritizes consumption also, it prioritizes investment also. Investment also, if you see, there is a 10% growth which has been projected next year, which is the RE. Consumption, you know that personal income tax have been reduced substantially. So at the hands of the people, there is going to be 1 lakh crore money. I hope this consumption will boost the growth. So basically, we will hear from Bhanumurthy ji which approach is better. Whether the consumption approach for growth is better or the investment approach is better. Let's see, we will hear his views as a renowned economist. But I feel there has to be judicial balance between the two. Consumption alone will not lead to the growth, investment alone will not lead to growth. But let's wait for the experts to speak on that. This particular budget, when I was going through, I found, beside the routine things, the areas which have been talked is the climate resilience, innovation and technologies. Beside the normal things, these are areas which was close to our heart. And another area which directly or indirectly is going to affect is the gig workers. As you mentioned, in International Labour Organization, in 2025 June, they are going to have a big discussion on the social security of gig and platform workers. I am in the advisory committee. All the discussions are going on in that particular aspect. The point is, despite many countries talking on this particular subject, India is probably amongst the few countries, or maybe among the very few countries that who have now started recognizing this registration under e-Shram portal and giving them some kind of social security, and many more what you call benefits are going to come from it, because we have to accept that they are very important pillars of the economic growth of any country. So at least recognition is started. There was no social security. That's very, very important thing which has also been touched upon. We were expecting much more, but let's see how the things will move further. Then coming to the public sectors, in fact, on first I was interviewed by media that how it is going to affect the public sector. There also he mentioned, you name any aspect which is talked there. Public sectors, you know that there are today 272 public sectors, operating public sectors, and irrespective of anything, I always mention that against the popular belief, 78% of the public sectors are the profit making. That's it. That's a figure, in fact, you should also quote anywhere, everywhere, so that a myth has to be broken, which is getting broken based on the performance of the public sector today, whether it's in the capital market, whether it's the investment front, whether it's in the growth, whether it's the profitability. So this particular budget, whether it talk of manufacturing, whether it's talk of innovation, whether it's talk of skilling, whether it's talk of sustainable development, whether it's talk of export promotion, whether it's talk of sponsored nuclear sets, waste power projects, whether it's talk of tourism, everywhere public sector will have to contribute. One very important fact which I had gone through based on the data, people are saying that this capital investment, whatsoever projected in the budget estimate, that has been brought down from 11.11 lakh crore was the B, and RE is getting projected to 10.18 lakh crore. Of course, there is a further jump from 10.18 to 11.21 lakh crore. But when you do the what you call micro analysis, over and above that, there is a public sector expenditure also, investment also, public sector resources. This is a very important statement which I am going to make, which many of you might not be aware or have not gone through in the budget document. In the B, for the public sector capital investment, budget was 3.68 lakh crore, over and above the 11.11, and the RE is 3.82 lakh crore. We are surpassing the overall capital investment in the country. Another point, next year, over and above RE, the growth which has been projected in B for the country in the capital investment is 10%. This is from 10.18 to 11.21 lakh crore. But for the public sector, it is getting projected from 3.82 lakh crore to 4.32 lakh crore, a jump of 13%. So that the confidence which is on the public sector, and we have to come up to the expectation of the nation to take it to the Viksit Bharat initiatives which have been started. But 3 points I like to mention here about the which I feel are very important in the budget. The first is the skilling. Skilling initiatives. We are in fact working very closely with the Ministry of Labour and Employment. We are working very closely with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the new initiative which are launched last budget also. And in this budget also we will be working with the government, especially they have announced establishment of National Center of Excellence for skilling with the global expertise. I'm sure that public sectors will play a major role in it because they have the wide geographical presence. They have got a very good infrastructure. They drive the innovation and the scale of operation. That's very, very important thing. The last time the apprenticeship program was launched, the first meeting which was held by Ministry of Corporate Affairs was here in our auditorium only, where all the public sectors were invited to share their views also. Second point I like to mention after the skilling is the innovation. Innovation is very, very important subject which has been touched upon. I firmly believe if we have to achieve the growth, if we have to become a manufacturing hub, we need to invest in the R&D is very, very important. Our Madam Director from the BIRAC is here. We traveled together to one of the program. I know that how emotional and passionate she was about the investment in the R&D. That's an area, in fact, we have to come to the country's expectation. Although the investment figure, if I tell you, in the world, in fact, people are spending close to 5%, 6% of their GDP. India is still below 1%, 0.8% or I might have reached to 0.9%. Although some of the public sectors, they are investing to the tune of 2% to 10% of their revenue. So we need to increase it if we want to become the real manufacturing hub. We do not want to become only assembly unit. We want to add the value addition in the manufacturing also. So this is an area very, very important thing. And when we talk about the innovation, then public sector will have to play a major role. All the public sector will have to play a role, not few public sectors. Along with the innovation, much more has been talked on the artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is, you know that what is happening, I'm not going to tell China and USA, but we are slightly left behind. We should have taken more steps in this particular area. I did some quick, survey among the public sector executives also. To be honest with you, I'll not ask the people who are sitting here. Most of us are not aware what exactly is artificial intelligence. We know only skill by ये है OpenAI है Chat GPT है चाइना का ये दे दोगे वर्ड दे दोगे तो स्पीच छप जाएगी ये चल जाएगी उसकी भी अभी उसकी पावर को एक्सप्लॉइट करने के बारे में बेसिक नॉलेज भी नहीं है दैट्स अ फैक्ट so yesterday only I was thinking that we will have some program at ISCO at least basic awareness need to be created देखिए we cannot wish away this इनिशियली भी उसके बेकार है यार सब लोग जो है कॉपी कर लेंगे ये कर लेंगे अब नाउ इट इज दी थिंग we need to work artificial intelligence. Now government is also talking, so public sector has to come forward. We'll take the lead in that and educating the public sector fraternity. We'll take help of the consultants, other institutes also, our own public sectors who are knowledgeable in this field. Third point I like to make is the climate resilience. It is talking in a big way the budget about the green technologies also, establishment of, for example, smaller size nuclear sets also, and many more things. So this is an area also I'm talking with respect to all these three areas with respect to scope also. Scope is doing a lot in climate action. In fact, you know that from last few years we are working very closely with GIZ Germany, and we have conducted many training programs, and we have been hand-holding many public sectors also in this particular direction. Much more is in offing, which I don't want to declare at the moment, but much more is in offing. But one point I like to mention to you, that we have launched a certification course for the advanced, because I always believe there could be some micro-credential course, some certification should be there. You visit our website, there is a advanced course on the climate change and climate action, which has been launched along with the GIZ Germany and the German government organization International Climate Initiatives. So this is a self-paced course, and after that one gets the certification also, which can be used later on. So I like to say that PSC will continue to play a major role in the India's growth story. And today, in fact, this particular program demystify everything. Whatsoever questions you have to ask, please ask this openly. Experts are there, best experts of the countries are there, who will talk about the economics, who will talk about the public policy, finance, taxation, anything and everything. And just go beyond the numbers and data. Numbers are okay, numbers are important. Behind the budget, what is the feeling? Because I feel these are some of the announcements of the directional, which will have the impact after a few months or maybe in 1 year time. But we need to learn the philosophy behind that. And please make best use of this particular session, and take it back and apply it to your personal front, to your organization front, and to public sector fraternity, total economy, nation at large. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a bird's eye view of the budget and the economic announcement. And also, I'm sure that the path laid down by you has got everyone thinking here how they can optimize the budget announcements in their organizations. So now, as we begin delving deeper into the understanding of the union budget, let us start by getting an insight into the significant economic and policy updates that will enable us to understand the nation's priorities and strategic objectives. For this, I would like to invite Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy for his inputs and insights. Presently serving as director in Madras School of Economics, Mr. Bhanumurthy has held many important positions in the education sector. He was previously the Vice Chancellor of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics and has published several papers in various aspects of the economy and served as consultant at ILO, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, McGill University, Canada, and also on various government committees. So eager to hear you, sir. Over to you for your inputs, please.
Shri Atul Somthi ji, team from Deloitte, members of SCOPE, and my dear ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, let me thank SCOPE for inviting me to this interesting session on decoding the Union Budget 2025. I was just thinking how many times I have come to this SCOPE for this budget session. So it's always a pleasure to be part of this event. Usually it happens just next day of the budget. I think because of Sunday, maybe that's the reason you shifted to today. I know you're going to have a very detailed, discussion about many micro issues in the budget. So what I'm going to do is I'll take a slightly macro perspective. I think that's very important for us to really see whether the budget has done, given the direction that Honorable Prime Minister has been asking for, that is Vikasit Bharat by 2047. I would like to take one step back and look at the two documents. One is the economic survey. I'm sure all of you are aware that one day before the budget is being presented, and then you have the budget document on the 1st of February. And these two budgets, in my view, I think certainly gives you a kind of direction that we are looking forward for 2047. Let me explain a little bit about the economic survey. And we also need to understand the context. I think post January 20th, I think the whole world has become very, very volatile, right? I'm sure all of you know why January 20th. And it's going to be much more volatile going forward. And that is one thing that very clearly the economic survey, without naming the country, actually argues for how we can set our house right. I mean, when there is a huge global uncertainty building up, and what they call it as geo-economic fragmentation. In fact, they use the word geo-economic fragmentation in the economic survey, and then how we can, we basically look at how we can grow more domestically, less dependency on the external environment. And one other thing they talk about is the buzzword in the economic survey is deregulation. I think that is one word which clearly comes out from the economic survey. And those who have read the newspapers, at least there are 2 or 3 newspapers, use almost the same word. They say that economic survey says the government get out of the way. In fact, they use the word get out of the way as the headlines. So that is the kind of thinking that the government has right now to see how Indian economy can be navigated in the kind of risk that is coming from both global as well as some more domestic environment. And very clearly, economic survey talks about partnering between the public as well as the private sector, and also bringing the education sector into the perspective. So they talk about the tripartite kind of a strategy where government, private sector as well as education sector will be working together to achieve whatever the long-term targets that we have. And we also had the GDP growth, and I'm sure many of us have that understanding that there is a GDP slowdown in the country. I think the 6.4% growth that we are talking about is, we think that Indian economy is slowing down. But if you look at the advanced, any country in the world, particularly big countries in the world, nowhere they have achieved even 4% growth in the past 3-4 years. So for our standard, 6.4 becomes a lower growth, and that actually gives it much more optimism that we are actually aspiring to grow much faster than 6.4%. Economic survey projects the GDP growth for the next year between 6.3 and 6.8%. And again, they have been very conservative. Those who work in the government, generally they don't be conservative, right? you try to put up, big numbers, but most of the times you don't achieve what you have projected. But for the past 3-4 years, which have become a hallmark of this government, that at least particularly under the current finance minister, that they always target project a conservative number. They would like to achieve much better than that. So in that sense, GDP growth that have been projected for the next year, that's 6.3 to 6.8%. I would say that will be somewhere closer to the upper bound, that is 6.8%, rather than the 6.3% the growth that we have. And coming to the budget, there are many things that have been addressed by the budget, whatever the idea that have come up in the economic survey. And again, this is another thing that I've been arguing. Very rarely you see the synchronization between the economic survey and the budget. So that is something I think we need to keep note of it. The first part of the budget in the macro, I have been telling about it wherever I go. The first thing that you need for any budget making process is what would be the nominal GDP growth for the next year. The budget assumes 10.1% against 9.7% in the current year. So the 10.1%, in fact, I can tell you, without 10.1%, all those other numbers will not be derived. The tax projections or the expenditure projections or the fiscal deficit, all these things have to start from this 10.1%. That is the beginning of the budget making process. So 10.1% again, in my view, is a very conservative. So going forward, I think we should be much better number. So, but it doesn't separate the nominal GDP growth should be equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. That is how the distribution happens at a macro level. The nominal GDP growth of 10.1%, even if you assume 6.5% real GDP growth as per the economic survey, so they're assuming that the inflation will be somewhere close to 3.5 and 3.6%. So that is the arithmetic. But I think this arithmetic is very important for all of us to understand. At the end of the day, we need to see how this fiscal policy will have its impact on the monetary policy also. Most of the time in the budget discussions, we completely ignore what happens to the monetary policy. But what I see in the current budget, it has actually given a lot of comfort to the monetary policy. I'll come to that later. Why? They think that, the inflation will be somewhere close to 3.5% for the next year. But at the same time, one important link between the fiscal and monetary is the market borrowing program of the Government of India. Now, if you look at that market borrowing program projections for the next year, it is going to be less than the last year. You don't see this kind of numbers very frequently. For this time, you see that Government of India clearly said that the market borrowing for the next year is going to be lower than the current year, which is very important for the financial markets, so that, ultimately, why we argue about bringing down the fiscal deficit or the market borrowing is that it leaves more resources for the private sector participation. Okay, the current year, I think Sopti Saab already hinted about this argument. Can we go for this investment-driven strategy for a long time? And we have done this capital expenditure strategy for the last 3 years. But I think the indication is that it has not been compensated, or crowding in impact of private investment has not been felt. The reason for that is, ultimately, I'm sure for public sector, you don't worry about the interest rates, but for the private sector, ultimately, the interest rates matter, and also the liquidity in the banking sector matters. Now, where do the liquidity come from? The liquidity comes from the household savings. Now, currently, the household savings actually came down to 7.5%. Now, given that kind of situation, if the government increases its borrowing program, what is left for the private sector is very limited. You have central government borrowing about 4.4% fiscal deficit, state government borrowing about 3% of their fiscal deficit. Now, what is left for the private sector? So this is the reason why we keep arguing that, you should bring down the fiscal deficit to whatever the 3% as per the Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act. Now, in that sense, the government has done an excellent job in terms of bringing down the fiscal deficit from 4.8% the RE for the current year to next year 4.4%. Now, this should not be termed as a fiscal compression kind of a thing. What we see here is, if you compare between FY25 and FY26, Finance Minister actually projecting a much better quality of expenditure for the current year. When I say quality of expenditure, the share of capital expenditure in the overall fiscal deficit is going to be higher in FY26 compared to the share of capex in the overall fiscal deficit in the current year, the FY25. The reason is, we know that capital expenditure has a larger multiplier, and this is what is actually driving the whole capex strategy for the past 3 years, where the capex multiplier was estimated to be about 2.45. That means if you are spending 1 rupee on capital expenditure, you get a 2.45 times of output from that particular expenditure. But I think there is also what we call cumulative multiplier, because capex doesn't lead to only 1 year outcome, right? You'll also have outcome for next 2-3 years. The cumulative multiplier is somewhere close to 4.5. That means if you are spending 1 rupee today, at the end of the project cycle, you get 4.5 times of your GDP. So the 2.45 number is actually my number, which I estimated in 2012. So that has actually started driving the whole capex strategy for some time. And what happened in the last year, that is the current year, FY25, is that there were constraints on the capex strategy. I think this is the point that we should, what you rightly raised. There are constraints on the government capex, and some people have attributed to the elections, not only at the general election, but also some of the state elections. But what I realize is that, you cannot continue to go for a capex strategy for a long term. As an author of that particular paper, I'm telling that you cannot continue to go for capex for a long time. So these I've been arguing that you should be brought down to 3% of GDP. So I think the current capex is almost somewhere close to 3.1% from 3.34% last year. So we are also seeing, again, Soktisa pointed out that number. Compared to last year, the FY26, the budget is projecting 11.2 lakh crore for capital expenditure, and within that 1.5 lakh crore is meant for the state governments. In fact, the current year, the slowdown in the capex is also because of there are some constraints at the state government level. Even the 1.3 lakh crore in the current year, it could not be disbursed for various reasons. So ultimately, there are capacity constraints at the government in terms of expanding the capital expenditure. I'm glad that government actually brought down the capex to 3%, which is same as what the FRBM Act has suggested in 2003. FRBM Act of 2003 suggests you have to bring down the fiscal deficit to 3% and the revenue deficit to 0%. That means the capital expenditure is going to be 3%. So we are closer to FRBM Act of 2003. If anybody says that we don't achieve FRBM Act, this is the number. I can tell you that we can achieve FRBM Act of 3% capital expenditure. But if you look at the effective capital expenditure, again, Sir has already pointed out, if you add that grant in aids to public sector enterprises, it actually goes to 4.3% of the total GDP. So I think these are all good news. So the point I'm trying to say is that compared to FY25, FY26 quality of expenditure is much better, and it will not lead to inflation, and that's a good news for us. But those who heard the finance minister's speech, for the first time, she has put up the whole budget in a framework, right? She talks about 4 engines, right? Then she talks about a fuel. The fuel is nothing but the reforms that she talks about. Then she talks about the what we call a destination, that is 2047, and she also talked about the guiding spirit, that is she wants to see that the budget is going to be inclusive, not only inclusive in terms of the people but also in terms of the regions. Of course, there are so many times Bihar was highlighted, that's for different reason, but we can ignore that part of the story. But I think most importantly, if you look at a simple national income identity where growth is nothing but private consumption, government consumption, investment, and the exports, we have 3 engines of GDP growth, that is consumption, investment, and the exports. Now, if you look at the budget, I think the finance minister successfully triggered all these engines by bringing some changes. I mean, private consumption, I don't think I should explain more. We all know what happened to all of us, right? I think all of us are beneficiaries of that. So I'm sure by now you would have asked your chartered accountants how much you are going to save from this shifting to new tax regime and all those things. So that part we all know much better than even economists. So I'll stop. I will not talk about it. But in terms of the investments, again, I already spoke about the capital expenditure strategy. But most importantly, very rightly, it's been identified that we need to focus on agricultural credit, MSME, again MSME until we reform the MSME and this agriculture, formalization of agriculture, we'll keep talking about it. But I'm glad for the past 4 or 5 years, there's so much of change in the way we treat the MSME sector or we look at the MSME sector. I think we have much better data set now compared to pre-COVID period. And I think Honorable Finance Minister has made it very clear that a lot of resources should be going to the MSME sector. So it has been, the credit limit has been enhanced, credit cards have been provided, so they're also focusing on export or MSME sectors. I think these are all good news for us. In terms of the third engine, that is exports, as I said, I started by saying that, there is a huge geo-economic fragmentation. I think this particular engine, I think we cannot depend much. So that is a big lesson for domestic public sector. I think when in the absence of, globalization forces, the responsibility of the public sector only increase, in my view. because the size of public sector actually come down because of the globalization forces. Now that the globalization forces are actually receding, I think there's going to be much more dependency on public sector, and that could be one reason why the government is actually going slow on disinvestments and other things. So I think, in fact, there are some stories, some cases where you have actually increased more investment in one of the public sector in the recent period. I forgot the name, RVNL or something like that. Yeah, many like that. So that there's a change in the thinking in terms of expanding the public sector, not necessarily. And Sir has told about 78%. I'm sure it's going to be increasing much more than 78% going forward in the absence of globalization forces. So that part. So in that sense, in terms of exports, many people don't consider removing the tariffs is a export strategy, right? I mean, there's an import tariff. Why should it become an export strategy, right? But actually, if you look at India's exports, particularly the manufacturing exports, is increasingly import-led. And we have been arguing against introduction of tariffs. Now, I think finally we are seeing some kind of a thinking, and we are seeing some reduction in the tariff rates. And I think there are good news for some of the exporters. Export credit has been, there is some incentive for export credit, and there are some policy that has been addressed in terms of bringing down the non-tariff barriers. So all these things are going to help exports, but as I said, you cannot really depend heavily on the exports going forward. And in the absence of that kind of a support, India can grow only at 7%, not more than that. Okay, the potential GDP of this country in the absence of exports is somewhere between 6.5 to 7%. So that we have to be very clear. So you should not say 6.4% in low growth or slow down in the growth rate. So we can only grow at 7%. Of course, there are many other triggers that is required if you want to really grow at 8%. In fact, Economic Survey argues that if you want to become Vikasit Bharat by 2047, you should grow at 8%. Okay, but I think one needs to be realistic in the context of very unfriendly global environment. Our potential growth cannot be more than 7%. So that is something that we have to keep in mind. So in terms of the fuel for engines, she talks about tax reforms. I know next week there's going to be Dela team will have much more work than what they are right now when this new direct tax bill is going to be introduced. I think this is the third attempt we are trying on the direct taxes, so I hope this time we will succeed in bringing the direct tax code. And the reforms in the financial sector, I don't know what happened on the budget day, particularly when the FDI in insurance have been declared, suddenly you have seen markets were going down. I don't know. Maybe you can explain why it has gone down. And we thought that is a reform. But I think maybe they are fearing that, the domestic industry will have to share that pie with more foreign investment, foreign companies. But I thought that is one important reform that happened in the financial sector. Of course, there are many other regulatory reforms also been highlighted by the finance minister. I'm not going to get into all those details. In terms of the fiscal, I have already highlighted some of the fiscal numbers. On the reduction in the, personal income tax, see, there are two things happen in this budget, okay? Usually, stimulus is given either on the expenditure side or on the taxes side. We never entertained the taxes side story till now. But this time, for the first time in the last maybe 15, 20 years, first time you see the stimulus coming from both taxes side as well as on the expenditure side. So I think that's going to be the major driver of the economy next year, and like the way you have capex multiplier of 2.45, there is also income tax multiplier. Okay, so again, I think my study in 2012 we estimated the income tax multiplier about minus 1.02. That means whatever the 1 lakh crore that we are going to lose in terms of taxes, I think it will have a multiplier impact on the GDP growth. So you would take together the tax multiplier and the expenditure multiplier together will have a much larger multiplier impact on the GDP growth. In fact, Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, he was arguing that it will have a multiplier of 5. I mean, that's too much in my view. I think 5 is too big a number for a multiplier, and if that is the case, we could have done this long back, right? So I don't think 5 is a number, but you will be seeing somewhere close to 2 to 3 as a multiplier when we have both shocks have been given. So the 2.45 and minus 1.01 is more of a partial multipliers, but if you give the shock together, you will have a larger multiplier impact on the GDP growth. So I think that is going to be very positive for the Indian economy. In terms of the macro fiscal framework, I mean, there's a lot of discussion about whether to target fiscal deficit or to target debt numbers. In my view, they are not very different. Those who understand these concepts clearly, I can tell you, debt is a stock and deficit is a flow variable. So you cannot really target a debt. You cannot target a ocean. You can only target some of the paths to the ocean rather than trying to target the ocean. But in any case, the argument is that the risk for fiscal is much more than for the monetary policy. Monetary policy has a very flexible inflation targeting, right? We have what we call a flexible inflation targeting. On the other hand, fiscal policy has a very tight fiscal deficit targeting, like 3% is the tight fiscal deficit targeting. But in that sense, what the thinking in the government is that it is better to target a long-term public debt so that it gives space for absorbing some of the shocks that comes up in the meantime. So yesterday, I think that in the last budget, very clearly, the Government of India made out that the public debt target should be between 49 to 51%, 50% plus or minus 1%. So, it looks very similar, like 4 plus or minus 2% that the monetary policy has. But at the same time, what is important is we also make assumptions about nominal GDP growth, 10%, 10.5, and there are 3 scenarios that they present in the budget document. You can derive what would be the fiscal deficit numbers for those conditions when you have a GDP growth of 10%, and if you want to achieve 50% public debt, you can actually derive your fiscal deficit number. But what is more important for us is it's not even the fiscal deficit, but we want to understand what is the distribution of fiscal deficit between revenue deficit as well as the capital expenditure. And it has implications for, which I started saying in the beginning, the nominal GDP growth should be equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. Now, if that mix of the fiscal deficit between revenue deficit and the capex will also influence the mix of the nominal GDP growth equal to real GDP growth plus inflation. If your fiscal deficit is more because of the revenue expenditure or revenue deficit, obviously it will have its impact on the inflation, right? So that is not what we are looking for. But I think it's very important for the government to come out with those numbers within that public debt of 50%. What is the back calculated numbers for fiscal deficit as well as the revenue deficit? Otherwise, monetary policy will have a difficult time, until unless we don't know for what the government is borrowing. So monetary policy will have its repercussion. And then one more thing I'll highlight and I'll stop it. There's one nice, interesting graph is there in that statement on the fiscal FRBM statement, where it clearly says that ratio between the change in the public debt, what we call change in liabilities, and the fiscal deficit is actually equal to 1. What it means is that there is no off-budget liabilities that are not part of the fiscal deficit. So that means it's clearly that particular graph has a huge implications for the market. What it means is that government is following a absolutely highly fiscal transparent kind of a way, all these numbers. So the change in the public debt should be equal to the current fiscal deficit. I told you debt is a stock, but if you take the delta, the change in public debt between 1 year and another year should be equal to the fiscal deficit of that particular year. So that transparency is absolutely the success story of Honorable Finance Minister for the past 4 or 5 years, and it actually gives a lot of information to the market. Okay. Now, if you want to understand how this is different, you can look at some of the states, how they fund the numbers. There are some states even today they borrow our budget. I mean, the state from where I come from, Andhra Pradesh, has the great example for how to borrow our budget. So they're more innovative in borrowing out of the budget. So I think that is not really there in the union budget document. So there are other numbers. I'm not going to get into that. But overall, I must tell you that this budget is going to be one of the budgets that is going to address the long-term strategy of 2047 that was highlighted in the economic survey. And at the same time, of course, this week we also have the monetary policy coming up. There are a lot of expectation that the monetary policy will respond to whatever the fiscal that has done. But in my view, I think it still needs little more clarity in terms of what is the fiscal deficit, what is the combination of fiscal deficit in terms of the real revenue deficit as well as capital expenditure that is going to lead us to the medium-term debt target of 50%. And at the same time, whether the 50% is the right number. In fact, the current FRBM Act says it should be brought down to 40%. Now, I know 40% is really a long call, but whether the 50% is the right number is something that, again, we need to do some more research work on that. Overall, there is a clear transparency, there is an improvement in the overall quality of expenditure, and I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen that news channels, and there's so much of discussion about government has not done much for agriculture, or there are so much of comments about sectoral allocations. I can tell you that last year, the way it happened to the capital expenditure, same thing happened to the revenue expenditures also. There are constraints not just on the capital expenditure. So one has to accept that there is a capacity constraint at the government level in spending not only the capital expenditure but also revenue expenditure. Okay. So even at the Ministry of Defense level there are constraints. So I think to assume that every time the allocation have to go up, keep on increasing, that really should not be the case. In fact, in the budget documents, even the finance minister very clearly say one of the strategies they follow is the saturation strategy. You cannot have a scheme which is running for 20 years, 30 years. Okay, there should be sunset clauses. So this is again a hallmark of the government right now, where each and every program has a sunset clause, and it should not be like every year keep on increasing. So to that extent, there are many schemes. In fact, rural development, if you look at the first decision of the new government was to enhance the number of houses under the Prime Minister Awas Yojana Gramin. So that is, there are some places where government is actually focusing little more. There are some areas where they are focusing little less, rightly so in my view, and I think that will really help. One more last point, and that's a concern for all of us, is that if you look at the total revenue expenditure, I think one particular item which is actually increasing, there is a secular increase in that particular item, is the interest payment. Right now, 1/4 of the revenue expenditure actually goes for interest payment. 25.6% is the interest payment share in the overall revenue expenditure. Last year it was 23%. So that is one number which I am concerned about, and I hope there will be some, particularly when you are actually borrowing less going forward, that would certainly bring down the interest payment. And that particular number has to be looked at more carefully if you want to really bring down your public debt to 50% by 2031, I think at the end of 2031. So other than that, I am very happy with the budget. I think going forward, we should be doing much better than what we have done in the last year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's very relieving to hear that you're happy with the budget. It's very few, not always. So yes, it's a very, very positive aspect. So thank you so much, sir, for providing a comprehensive view on the economic and the policy updates and what is the reason behind the various announcements in the budget. Now, before we move forward, we are opening the floor for any questions that you have for the professor, since we would be taking up the taxation aspect next. So if there are any questions, you can please raise your hands. We can take the, yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Professor. Thank you for nice explanation. I have one question, actually one apprehension.
Please also here, sir. I will be nice. Just introduce yourself and your.
I am Anil Kumar Chwabe, Senior DG Finance from Bharat Electronics, Defense PSU. So my question is related to export. What you told that high tariff is a barrier to export also, but that can be partially neutralized by effectively passing on the benefits. Like drawback scheme, it is AIR rate is average rate. If you really want to utilize brand rate, whoever is doing it, he knows how much complicated it is. We have represented also. For defense items, a big SCOMET list is there. Almost all our items become ineligible for road tax benefit. For services, there is no scheme as on date. After discontinuance of SCIS, there is no incentive for that SCIS. So, that thing is being ignored procedurally, how to pass on that export benefits to the exporter, so that this tariff or in that domestic taxes also are neutralized, that effectiveness is not there. And this is general feeling for defense industry, I'm telling.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, let me take a slightly broader perspective on this. It's a post 1991, okay. If you look at the trade side, apart from the exchange rate devaluation, the biggest reform happened was on the tariff reduction. I mean, I think Sopti Sahab, those generation may be knowing that if you want to import some 300% tariff or 400% tariff, now we have brought down from 300-400% to less than 10%. That is the biggest reform happened. And that is the biggest driver of our export share of increasing the export also over a period of time. So that is at a macro level. But if you look at sectoral level, on the services sector, as you rightly pointed out, there is not much of intervention because services, we are extremely competitive in the market. Okay, so if you differentiate between exports and services and manufacturing, services we are extremely competitive in the market. So I mean they are doing much better than other countries also. But when it comes to manufacturing sector, we are not very competitive. See, okay, particularly on the price side. Now tariff is nothing but import tariff is nothing but export tax. Now, where do you transmit that export tax? Are you going to transmit to the domestic consumers or foreign consumers?
If incentives like drawback is effectively passed on, 100% if duty I am taking, like brand rate, through brand rate, then it will be neutralized. High tariff for inputs will be neutralized. But that is so tedious process that people are not opting for that, or it is not effective.
These are
that needs to be simplified.
There are many more micro issues. I think one needs to simplify. That's what, as I said, economic survey talks about one full chapter on deregulating all those issues. I hope somebody will look at it, somebody will implement someday.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else in the audience? Otherwise, we'll just take one question that has been asked online. Okay, so Professor, there's a question which is coming on CapEx. So the CapEx is actually reduced or remains stable. So people want to understand that there's been an increasing trend. Now there's stability. Won't it impact the job creation and the investment adversely from the industry side?
Well, just before the COVID period, the CapEx is only about 5 lakh crore. Okay, from 5 lakh crore to 11 lakh crore.
That's a jump.
It's a matter of 3 years. It's a very substantial, in my view. I think, I'm sure all of you agree with me that we have went from 5 lakh to 11 lakh crore. What I'm trying to say is that right now there is constraints in terms of expanding further within the government sector. And at the same time, as I said, as argued, we followed CapEx strategy when markets were in subdued situation because private sector was not really coming up. So government sector was actually compensating for that gap created by the private sector. Now what is happening in the post-COVID, now that we got a very normalized kind of situation, we want the private sector to be part of this growth story. So that will happen only when you leave the space for them and you leave more resources for them. So this is the point I'm saying. So, and as per the act also, you have to bring down the capex to 3%. You cannot continue to have 3.4%. So, in my view, in fact, the broader issue here is, as I started saying, whatever the fiscal deficit we run, I think it has to be financed by the domestic savings. Now, we had a household saving of 9.5 to 10% historically. So there 3% was left for the central government, 3% for the state governments, and the rest of the resources meant for the private sector. That's how this whole arithmetic was, made part of the FRB Act. Now when the household saving had come down to 7.5%, now somebody has to adjust. Otherwise, you get into that liquidity problem from the banking sector. Okay. So we are arguing that you come down from 3.4 or 3.5, that capex that we had. In fact, I would argue that even the fiscal deficit, that 4.4% right now, that should also be brought down to less than 4%. Then only you will get more resources for private sector.
Okay. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. Now, we thank you, Professor, for the economic insight. And now we will move ahead to the comprehensive. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for the engaging session. I'm Nidhi, Director Finance from IIM. I'm grateful to VP sir for acknowledging me in this kind of market of innovation. So,
All the mics is the result. Yeah, this percentage is always a problem. If you look at the number that you said and compared to other countries, certainly we are not doing that. Now, this is not limited to only innovation. We also look at health, education, all other social sectors. You do find this kind of problem. So again, I'll come back to this issue of capacity constraint.
so maybe PPP model is the
PPP model, I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, except that in few sectors, we have a whole experience of how we manage the PPP. Only few sectors out of many other sectors that we've been doing. But I think coming back to your question, so certainly there is a need to address first the capacities at the government, then only you should start allocating. In fact, this year, this huge unspent balance across the social sector expenditures, both at the central government as well as state government level. In my view, there is no dearth of resources.
execution.
It's an execution, it is the governance level issues, it is also capacity issues at the government level. Particularly if you go down the levels of government, especially the district level, which is the place where you spend more. And I mean, that's a open answer and open question for all of us. Big ticket programs, you have unspent balances. Now, how do we explain that?
That might be saving as
No, that same thing happens to all sectors also, including innovation. If you don't spend, that will become savings. But that's not what we wanted. We wanted governments to spend more. But having said that, I can tell you that again, the way government spending happening in the last few years is certainly much better, because of DBT and all those things. And we see there is a speed of implementation also there. But I think maybe that's a constraint at the ground level. We don't know. I think that has to be looked at. Yes. No, I think there's a difference between brought down and came down. So it actually came down. Nobody brought it down.
Actually, yeah.
So I think it came down for various other reasons. But I think the tax proposal that happened, particularly this 12 lakh crores. So I'm not sure whether all this will go for consumption. There's some part of the story will be from the saving side. Particularly if you look at the recent the financial stability report of the RBI, household sector is highly leveraged. I think that constraint may be loosened a little bit because of this saving that we are going to see. So in my view, this is a good news not only for the household but also for the banking sector. They will be having much more resources to really do their business. So I would expect the household saving share to go up rather than coming down.
So actually last time also when the budget came in July 2024, so I attended the same program. So you were telling that people have saving habits earlier. So now with this new regime, savings will suddenly further come down. So now further it has made more attractive new tax regime. So habit of forceful savings will suddenly come down and people will not prefer to do forceful savings. So whether that will make a long-term effect in liquidity position?
See, in the past we had so much policy measures to forcefully saving, like many of us went for that infrastructure bonds and this. There are so many Falana bonds were there. Even the PF also, right? EPF also you went for more than 12%. So all those avenues have actually been blocked now. That is one reason in my view, particularly the formal sector saving has come down because of these 3-4 changes that happened in the recent period. Should we go back to that is a different story, or should we go back to different instruments is a different story. But ultimately, if the economy can grow faster, I think savings also will go up. So there is a bi-direction causality between savings and GDP growth. So it's not always one side of the story.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I hope I have not repeated last year's answer.
Any more questions from the audience present physically? Okay, so we'll take the next question, sir, and this will be the last one from the online portal that we have. So the question is coming on the devaluation of rupee, sir. As to how do you think the devaluation or the threat of further devaluation of rupee would impact the growth rate, which is already projected at 7% or 6.8%? Would it further reduce? And especially with the US constantly harping on the tariffs.
Yeah, I think again it's not devaluation, it's only depreciation.
Okay.
Devaluation is a policy measure, depreciation is a market determined.
Okay.
So we have to be clear about the concepts. So I think if you look at, it's a big wave, you cannot really go against the wave right now. Yesterday we have seen how rupee depreciated so sharply. But at the same time, RBI has been managing the rupee volatility much better than many other emerging market economies. So if you look at comparable currencies, I think we have done better. But it's still going to be a challenge for RBI. They also, if you look at for the past 2 months, December to January, there is a secular depreciation of currency from 84 to 87 right now. There are a lot of criticism that, RBI should not hold that rupee they should allow the rupee to depreciate as much as it is. I don't think that is the right way. Right now, see, there are two ways of determinants of depreciation. One is because the real factors, that is when your trade deficit go up, so there is a pressure on the rupee. The other one is when there is a change in the speculative flows, then there is a depreciation of the rupee. In both the ways it can have repercussion. In my view, RBI should allow rupee to depreciate if it is because of the real factors, that is the trade deficit kind of thing. But it is because of the speculative factors, I think RBI should intervene in the market to contain the volatility. So but leave the rupee to identify its own value on its own. We should not really disturb the market except the volatility component.
Okay. Okay, so I think we should move ahead now, and thank you, Professor, once again for being with us and addressing the economic aspect of the budget. And now I think there's one more question online. Yeah, no. So now we would be moving ahead with the budget session on taxation reforms and what the taxation aspects have been introduced or addressed in the budget. And for this, I would request the Deloitte team to please come on the dais, and I request the eminent panelists to please join us in the audience. So I would like to invite the Deloitte team onto the dais to present the budget analysis, and I call upon Ms. Shelvi Singhal, subject matter expert from Deloitte, who will take the session on corporate and international taxation. So Shelvi, can we have you on the dais? Ms. Saloni Roy and Ms. Anupama Agarwal from Deloitte, who will be taking the session on indirect taxation. So ma'am, can we have you on the dais, please? And of course, we have Devya Baveja. I would request Nitin Bajal to please join Nitin on the dais, who would be taking the session on personal taxation. Now, with this, I'll hand over the podium to Devya for further on the budget. So over to you, Devya.
So, good morning, everyone, and I would like to thank Scope team for giving us the opportunity to present. We've had very insightful two sessions earlier from Mr. Sopti and Professor Bhanumurthy. Really, glad to hear or proud to hear how our public sector is playing a key role and how the perception has changed from what it was earlier to what it is now. And also, I'm not an economics student, but really it was learning to me from when I heard on the economic side. So now we'll move on to the tax part. I know the finance minister talked about having a new tax bill being tabled, and a lot of work has happened since last 6 months. That's what I understand, because the comments have been invited from public, various representations have been made. So we're all looking forward to the new tax bill which comes out later this week, and excited for that. So I'll first invite Shelvi to talk about corporate taxes. There are some significant changes there, and she'll take us through what those changes are, how does it impact, and then we will, have some Q&A, or maybe we can leave Q&A to the end, and we'll first cover all the tax part first. So Shelvi is a director with us, extensive experience in the direct tax field. She also is a part of the government and public service practice for Deloitte, and leading a lot of engagements on the public sector side. So Shelvi, over to you.
Punch is here.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Like Sir has already said, most of it will come as a part of the income tax bill in the next week. However, how Shopti Shah mentioned, let's understand what is going to be the government's philosophy around the income tax bill, which is going to come in the next week. And government has harped earlier also, and now they have once again harped upon the point of that is going to be a Nyaya Smita and not really a Bharatiya Danda Smita. So more and more litigation procedures, reforms, and we are likely to get more in terms of how they mentioned that it would be half of the current booklet we have on the taxes. So considering that, it looks like most of the litigation procedures which are currently there would be shorter down, maybe cut down, or maybe included as a part of one simple tax procedure. Currently, like what we have is a different chapters governing assessments, reassessments, search, block. So that is something we're really looking forward to, because government is also harping upon the tax certainty and the reduced litigations. So it looks like in the coming bill, they might be coming with lesser reforms, but having a more simplified versions of the existing provisions only, so that it has a more tax certainty for the taxpayers as well as for the tax administration also. Now moving forward in terms of the withholding tax provision, because that's where the most of the changes has come in the direct tax budget this time. Earlier there was a TCS and TDS, both were applicable on the sale of the goods, and it was left to the taxpayers to decide whether TDS would be applicable or TCS would have been applicable. Now it has been simplified and now it has been omitted. So now only the TDS will continue to go on the sale of the goods, even including the share transfer transactions. However, now no more there would be applicability of the TCS anymore on the sale of the goods. The government has already announced the removal of also TDS and TCS higher rate for the purpose of non-filer of income tax returns. So now the withholders and deductors will no more have the responsibility to identify the specified payees who have actually not filed their income tax returns, which is definitely a welcome move, because we have seen a lot of the deductors were struggling and going back, especially whenever they had transactions with the farmers or even the individual deductees. These were the challenges which was coming. So now it won't be required anymore. Previously in July 2024, the government has already decriminalized even if the payment of TDS was made late, but before the due date of filing of the TDS return. The same decriminalization has also been now granted for the purpose of TCS as well. So it will not be criminalized, and no prosecution would be taken if the payment has been made within the due date of filing statements. Moving forward, now TDS thresholds has also been increased. One of the most recognized one is coming on the TDS of the rent, which was earlier 2.4 lakh per financial year. Now it has been increased to 50,000 per month, which roughly converts around 6 lakhs per financial year. Similarly, the payments which has been made to the professionals and the technical services has also been increased from 30,000 to 50,000 per financial year. In fact, the dividend which has been made to the individual shareholders is also being doubled. Now from 5,000 it has been increased to 10,000 per financial year. Also the interest on securities, earlier it was nil, there was no threshold. Now it has also been increased to 10,000 per financial year. Moving forward on the TCS provisions, which came on the liberalized scheme couple of years back, whether now the TCS was required on any remittances which were made up to 7 lakhs. It has been now increased by 3 lakhs, and now the limits are 10 lakhs for any remittances made outside India under the LRS scheme. In fact, now the TCS on the remittances for education purposes are also being exempt. However, these has to be from the loans taken from the specified financial institutions. So if anyone is still paying for the education of their children from their own pocket, it will continue to be TCS. The government has also introduced earlier the concept of updated return of the income. Now it has also been, earlier it was only for 2 years. Now it has been extended for another 2 years. So now from 24 months, it has been extended to the 48 months. However, the additional income tax payable limits has also been undergone a change. It is 25%, 50 or 60 or 70 depending on the filing done by the taxpayer. However, no updated return could be made if the notice of reassessment, so if mean the reassessment proceedings has already been opened, then the updated returns can't be filed. We have to go through the reassessment return filing and all other procedures of the reassessment. Moving forward in terms of the charitable institutions, government has been streamlining this charitable space for quite a long. Earlier in the last budget also, they came back with merging two regimes. There were two different regimes which were coming under 1023 and section 11. Now both these merged in earlier ones. The government has also made a lot of changes in terms of registrations, renewables of these charitable organizations over the years. However, this has largely impacted the large trust and institutions. So based on the industry recommendations, the government has now announced that registration validity for the small trust or institutions would be for 10 years, not the 5 years. However, the small trust has only been defined, which has total income up to 5 CR. And when it says the total income, it is not only the contribution, it will even include any other income which is coming either as a service income or even as an interest income on their deposits. In terms of the specified person definitions, earlier any donor which were giving you more than 50,000 was regarded as a specified person, and therefore there was a lot of arm's length pricing and regulations were covered to see what are the transactions you are doing with your donor. Now it has been increased. In the same year, if the contribution has been increased to 1 lakh, also in aggregate there is an additional condition of more than 10 lakhs, up to 10 lakhs up to the end of the financial year. Interesting, the relatives of such donors has been omitted, and even the concerns in which the donors may have any substantial interest is also being remitted. So to that extent, the definition of the specified person who are donors has been restricted. Earlier, any specified valuation were attracting the taxes as well as the cancellation of the registration. Now, even a simple incomplete application would no longer be considered as a specified violation. However, there is a false or incorrect information which has been provided will continue to fall under the definition of specified violation, which could result into cancellation of registration as well as a tax on your incomes. This is the last slide on the corporate tax. Like I said, there's not much which has been covered this time. However, there's some other key incentives, or you can say which has been introduced in this budget this time. Largely, the government focus has been towards IFC centers. So now the sunset for the commencement of the operations in IFCs were 2025, March 2025. It has been extended by 5 years. So now they get a fresh bedworth of 5 years. In fact, the relocation of original funds to any ETFs in IUF is also being exempted now. It will continue to be a tax neutral transaction. And in terms of the deemed dividend, though the government has not touched those deemed dividend provisions for a long time. This is the first time they have actually touched and make an exemption also into this. So if there is any advances which is given between the parent entity listed overseas, but as well as having an IFC unit, which is largely a treasury center, will not be considered as a deemed dividend. In fact, the tax benefits which has been proposed from the insurance schemes or even for FIs, which has a cap gains or dividend for ship leasing, has also been exempt. In terms of the litigation procedure, largely it is in the nature of whether there has been any misgaps or whether there has been issue which has been coming in terms of the interpretation, which has been announced now. So now the amendments are being proposed in terms of virtual digital assets. They will also be covered as an undisclosed income. Time limit earlier for the approval of retention of the books of accounts has also been rationalized. However, in the last budget, the government reintroduced the block assessments for the purpose of search cases, and to that extent the penalty ideally was not supposed to be applicable for any searches which has happened after 1st September 2024. The same penalty has now been relaxed. It won't be imposed on the searches which happened post 1st April. Period for filing any immunity from penalty and prosecution was only 1 month. Based on the industry recommendations, now it has also been increased up to 3 months. Coming to the last point on the miscellaneous points on the corporate tax side, the amalgamations. In case of any amalgamations, the losses will only be allowed up to the 80 years. So the losses will not get a fresh lease just because there is a predecessor and successor. It will be only up to the 8 years when it was first computed by the predecessor company. Tonnage tax provisions has now also been extended to the inland vessels. And also there has been new provision which has been introduced in the budget for the taxation of the crypto assets. So that's last in terms of corporate tax side. But now coming to the transfer pricing, because there has been one interesting amendment which has been made on the transfer pricing side. We have seen block assessment only in cases of search. We have never seen a block assessments anywhere under the Income Tax Act. This is the first time when the income tax has come back with the transfer pricing block assessments. And it would be applicable not from AY 24-25. In fact, this is going to be applicable from the next financial year and effective from the AY 26-27. So what will happen in that? Assessor will have the option to exercise if they want to get their assessment transfer pricing block assessments. So it will have the option to exercise in a particular form or the manner for 2 consecutive previous years in addition to the year in which under consideration. So now what will happen, the cases which were piled up to the TPO and they were doing a lot of same assessment, same transaction, even the margins were not changed or comparables were not changed, is not required to remain at the TPO level any longer. Now the transfer pricing officer will validate that option, and if he agrees, then the arm's length price will be same as determined by the transfer pricing officer for the first year. It will continue for the similar transaction for the next 2 years as well. In those cases, no new reference even is required to be made by the AO to the TPO, because all of this will be covered as a part of the block assessment. However, there have been 2 exclusions which has been made. These provisions will not apply to the search cases. And also the CBTT will also continue to give any guidelines if there are any difficulties or any other issues which arise in terms of the timelines. TPO wanted couple of the transactions. What happens if there is a new transactions which comes in the next year, say in this year 2 or year 3? How that will work. So in those cases, those guidelines will come. However, then the timelines has now been revised in accordance with the block reassessment for the transfer pricing cases. So before that, now I will hand over to the indirect tax colleagues and we will have the Q&A at the last session. Thank you.
So, Anupama and I will take this session and we'll both run it together. So, indirect tax typically what it means, it would cover both GST as well as customs. And now GST, we have GST council meetings which happen regularly at different points of time. Between last time's budget and this time's budget, there have been 2 GST council meetings. There were certain amendments that were proposed. The changes that need to be made in the law have been carried out in this year's budget. Those proposals have been made. So when we talk about the legislative changes, many of them are carrying forward the philosophy policy which was mentioned in these GST council meetings. Now, the first point that we're coming to is actually not very good for us because we want certainty in tax, in doing business. So we had a Supreme Court decision, and what the government has done, it has overruled the Supreme Court decision by making a change in the law. So there has been litigation on this aspect about plant and machinery, about taking credit as far as immovable properties are concerned. So essentially there was a blockage of credit which was happening. And safari retreats, when the Supreme Court passed its decision, it was welcomed by industry across because it allowed for relaxation, and it gave a beneficial interpretation for taxpayers. However, the government has come out with a proposal to again stick to their interpretation, which was the blockage of credit in the process of construction of buildings. So this is something that the government is following through, and this will be in effect soon once the finance bill is passed.
So there are 2 points, There are 2 points which are relevant, that this is a retrospective amendment. So Supreme Court had drawn a distinction between plant or machinery and plant and machinery, and based on the interpretation that plant or machinery is different from plant and machinery, they said that if the building per se qualifies as a plant, the input tax credit would be eligible if it is not for use on its own account. So to the amendment, the retrospective amendment that they've introduced in the Finance Bill 2025, that will nullify probably the Supreme Court observations to the extent of the difference between plant and machinery or plant or machinery. But Supreme Court had also made detailed observations on what is used on its own account. And the interpretation of the term on its own account would still hold relevance under the future laws also, for the future time being also, because under section 17(5), the credit is restricted on goods or services used for the construction of immovable property on its own account. So what is on your own account is something which will continue to remain relevant even after this retrospective amendment comes into force.
Yeah, just the question. It will be discussed in Q&A as well, but on this issue,
So Supreme Court gave the observation on account, but it was just an observation. We didn't find in the final conclusion remarks. So there is a debate on this, but going with the intention of the government that they have nullified and made it a retrospective amendment. So will still the own account interpretation, which is just a discussion point in the order, but not in the crux or conclusive, will it still be considered as a strong argument for this interpretation?
So obviously it's a obita dicta and not the ratio decidendi of the Supreme Court judgment, but considering these observations were made by the Supreme Court, it will continue to have persuasive value, even though not binding value, because as you rightly mentioned that it was not part of the final judgment, but it was discussed, because the term on its own account continued to remain in the law even after this amendment was made.
Agree. But on account interpretation has been completely changed. So it has never been imagined that on account interpretation can be like this as well. So the government has not clarified this, but it's going to be a debate again.
It continues to be a debatable topic. So to that extent, Supreme Court judgment is not completely nullified.
Right.
It still continues to hold some relevance.
Thank you.
But obita dicta does not have any binding value. So it's just an observation. So nothing, can be relied upon on this. Yes. Yeah. So the next aspect is on vouchers. There was a debate on vouchers previously about taxability of vouchers. when should the time of supply be, what should the rate of vouchers be, because sometimes you get gift vouchers, so there was a debate. Now the entire provision regarding vouchers has been removed from the law. So the entire aspect about time of supply, rate of supply, all that has been removed. So whatever is actually purchased using the voucher, that would be subject to tax. So suppose you get, just to take an example, is a Marks and Spencer's voucher of say 1,000 rupees, and you buy some jacket or something, whatever is the rate of tax that is on the jacket, that would apply. So there's no separate rate. But if it was just a Marks and Spencer voucher by itself, there could be different products which could have been purchased with different rates of tax. So now that entire debate forever has been removed. It's just a mode of, it's money. It's like considered as money, and therefore no tax there.
This was also clarified white circular which was issued on 31st December 2024 after the 55th GST Council meetings, because there were a lot of court rulings also on the taxability of the vouchers. While everyone per se agreed that voucher per se should not be taxable, but authorities in several jurisdictions were taking a view that, especially for those entities which were dealing with trading of vouchers, because, many corporates give vouchers as part of Diwali gifts or to incentivize employees, dealers, etc. So there are many entities which per se deal with vouchers. So how is their income liable to be taxed? That was a larger dispute because they generally would buy a voucher for 800, sell it for 900, while the face value of the voucher would be 1,000 rupees. So how is the margin or the differentiator to be taxed was something which was not clear, because they obviously could not disclose their margins as a pure agent, which was quite clear, because then no one would buy the voucher. So to clarify all those aspects, GST Council took a decision that voucher would be treated as a mode of consideration, and whatever margin you're earning separately, you pay GST on those margins separately.
Okay. Now, when GST was introduced, there was this concept of cross-charge and input service distributor that was introduced. Now, there was confusion regarding whether an entity should do cross-charge, whether it should do take input service distributor or registration. Most organizations were following a cross-charge mechanism. Just to make it simple, if there's an organization with multiple GST registrations and they are procuring services which can be used not only by the office where it is being paid for, procured by, but it is distributed across, the beneficiary is across the country. In that case, whether the distribution should happen by way of an input service distributor or as a cross charge. Also, there are certain activities which a particular office, central functions which are performed, where there is to be a cross charge. A central function may be performed at a head office or even a regional office for other locations. So now the law has emerged. There were certain advanced rulings as well. Last year, the budget made IST provisions mandatory, but from a future date. So it will be effective as of 1st of April 25. And they are, so most organizations are doing this analysis, getting their IST registration in place. There was some concern about interstate reverse charge mechanism. Can you discuss that?
Yeah, sure. So after ISD was, once the IST provisions were amended in the last budget, ISD was made mandatory. They had also introduced an amendment to say that credit of GST paid under reverse charge could be distributed through IST. As all of you would be aware that presently, for GST paid under reverse charge at the head office, credit could not be distributed by way of ISD and it had to be cross-charged only. So to overcome that loophole, they had amended the provisions in the CGST Act, which said that credit paid, GST paid under reverse charge could also be distributed under IST. So those provisions were introduced, those provisions had reference only to the provisions of the CGST law. So then there was a dispute, let's say I'm paying a lawyer's fees by way of IGST under a reverse charge mechanism. Can that be distributed by way of ISD? So to clarify that issue, they have introduced an amendment in the law which says that even if you're paying IGST under reverse charge mechanism, then that could also be distributed further by way of an ISD mechanism. So this is just to clarify clarificatory amendment to settle the disputes before actual ISG provisions become applicable from 1st April 2025.
Okay, the next aspect is on credit notes. So every organization, which is supplying and raising invoices, there are situations where a credit note is raised. There would be a situation, maybe there is a renegotiation, or incorrect invoice. There could be different reasons for issuance of a credit note. Now, what the law is amending to provide is that if a credit note is issued, then to get a corresponding relief is in your output tax liability, it needs to be ensured that the recipient has reversed the credit that they have taken. So what it means is, suppose, say, as a service provider, raises an invoice, say, for 1 lakh rupees, and then there is a GST of 18,000 rupees. Now they issue a credit note for the entire value, it's a wrong invoice, whatever, so a credit note needs to be issued. So to get the benefit of the reversal, you've already deposited 18,000. If you have to reduce your output tax liability, you have to make sure that the recipient has also reversed the credit in their books. So both sides, so only then can you get the benefit of the credit note. So and this will now, we have this new IMS portal. So this is going to be implemented using the IMS portal. So in a way, this is giving effect to the IMS system.
If I may just add, so right now the requirement to reverse credit by the recipient was there under the section 15 of the CGST Act, which provided for post-sale discount. So only if you are issuing a credit note for providing post-sale discount to the customer, then there was a requirement that for claiming the benefit of post-sale discount, the ITC should have been reversed by the recipient. For all those of you who are from indirect tax background and may have opted for IMS on a trial basis in the month of November and December, you may have noticed scenarios where the credit notes were raised by the suppliers and those credit notes were rejected by the recipients on the IMS portal. So the issue was, I as a supplier have raised the credit note and have disclosed that credit note, I have disclosed the reduced liability in my GSTR1. Now the recipient has rejected the credit note. Now do I increase my turnover in 3B or do I just, take the benefit of credit note and disclose the reduced liability in 3B? So there were a lot of disputes for the last 2 months because obviously IMS was not mandatory, it was an optional basis, but there were practical challenges also of reconciling the returns to the books of accounts. Now with this, it is very clear that IMS will have a legal force. If you have issued a credit note, you have to get your recipient to accept the credit note, and then only your liability will get reduced. Otherwise, you will have to disclose a higher liability in your 3B, which will obviously lead to differences in your 1 versus 3B and then eventually books versus 3B also. So the onus has been placed on the supplier that the recipient accepts the credit note and also reverses the credit to that extent.
So the next point is about pre-deposit amount, where when you go before an appellate authority or the tribunal, where it's only penalty which is in dispute, then the pre-deposit amount would be 10% of the demand, of the penalty demand. Otherwise, usually the pre-deposit is calculated based on the tax. But here it is, because there is no tax, there's only penalty, so they prescribe that will be 10% of the penalty amount, where it is only penalty which is in dispute.
Here also there's a point. So while for normal pre-deposit amount there's a cap on the amount of pre-deposit. For instance, for first appellate authority it's 25 crores under CGST, SGST respectively, and for the second appellate authority it's 50 crores under CGST, SGST respectively. Here they haven't prescribed any cap per se. So if a company is sitting with a penalty equivalent to the tax amount, let's say 500 crores, then obviously the penalty can go really huge. So this obviously has a lot of larger ramifications unless they amend this and introduce a cap similar to the normal pre-deposit provisions before the finance bill gets enacted.
So litigation in our country is very expensive and time consuming, and these pre-deposits, though they have kept the limits high, they wanted to discourage people going in for litigation, but the fact is that one has to go in and litigate because some of the issues and demands that are raised are not justifiable. So this actually creates a lot of burden on doing business in India. You'd remember that there was this ranking which used to be there, it's no longer there, ease of doing business in India, where a consistent aspect was about tax, just undertaking tax compliances, certainty of tax matters. Those aspects continue to be like a sting in a sense in India when people consider investing in India. One, as a country, we need to be a little mindful of that because now there are other economies which are coming up, so they're also considered to be jurisdictions where investments could come in future. So our image to be a tax-friendly jurisdiction and to have certainty in tax. Everybody, I think most people would like to comply with the law. We're not looking at whatever is right, justifiable, we'd like to pay that, whatever is due. But to have unnecessary demands is something that we would like to avoid. Yeah. Do you want to take the next one?
So there's a Schedule 3 in the GST Act which provides for transactions which shall neither be treated as supply of goods or services.
Sorry, come here.
Yeah, no problem. So there are certain transactions which are to be treated neither as supply of goods or services. So there was an amendment in the last budget which said that supply of warehouse goods for export before clearance into DTA. So if you're supplying the goods, whether warehouse from one warehouse to another or exporting them outside before clearance into DTA, those transactions were clarified to be neither supply of goods or services. So with respect to transactions between SEZs and FTWZs, SEZ is deemed to be a territory outside India for the purpose of taxation law. It's important to note, but still disputes were being raised by the tax authorities that on supplies of supply of goods from one SEZ to another SEZ or from one SEZ to FTWZ, whether GST is applicable, and apparently many taxpayers were paying GST on supply of goods from one SEZ to another SEZ or SEZ to FTWZ. So to clarify that, an entry is being introduced in Schedule 3 which says that if goods are being supplied from SEZ or FTWZ before domestic clearance, then this shall neither be treated as supply of goods or services, thereby making it non-taxable. But it is important to know that this is a prospective amendment and this is not a retrospective amendment. So those taxpayers obviously who have paid, it is clarified that they will not get a refund. But those who are not paying, they can still get notices saying that you have to pay for the past period, because this is a prospective amendment and this in a way says that past was taxable, future is not taxable. So that's another grey area which they've left in the budget.
So for this invoice management system, IMS, there have been certain changes made in the law, just so that the GSTR 2B, how that would work going forward. We have 2A, 2B, how that would work considering IMS. Today, it is still, we still have to have an effective date notified, but the legal framework has been enabled. Then there is a definition to the term local authority. There was a dispute as to whether DDA qualified as a local authority. And so any guesses, do you think DDA would qualify as a local authority?
No, it has already been clarified. I think
Yes.
during the introduction, they have the FAQs contain this aspect also.
Correct. So you're right.
The regulatory authorities and these authorities, they are not.
Yeah, you're right. So local authority essentially are municipal authorities, MCD, and like panchayat bodies who actually administer, govern a particular jurisdiction. So there has been a definition which has been brought out in the law which defines municipal funds and local funds, and that's how you determine what would be a local authority. And local authority, the definition is important at times when to look at the liability to pay tax, when there are supplies made to a local authority, who is the person who would be liable to make the payment of tax? There could be cases of reverse charge mechanism also. Is it, the recipient, or is it the supplier? So various areas of the law, one has to determine whether, particular to get the benefit, or to interpret the taxability, you need to look at whether you qualify as a local authority. So yeah, you want to add to this?
Yeah, for instance, in Delhi, you have both MCD and DDA. So in that context, MCD is the authority which has the power to levy, MCD toll tax. Every time a taxi enters Delhi, they pay 100 rupees as MCD toll tax. Whereas if you go to Noida, there's no separate authority like MCD and DDA there. There's only one Noida authority which has the power to levy those, toll taxes also on vehicles entering UP, and they govern the other administrative matters also for that particular region. So it's not that, for instance, GDA does not qualify as a local authority, as you may have read their judgments also on this issue clarifying the aspect. But for each city, which authority, or for each city or region, which authority qualifies as a local authority or a municipal authority, that has to be seen basis a definition which has been inserted, which says that amongst other things, they have the power to levy duties, cess or toll taxes, So that definition has been provided. So I think this will provide certainty, particularly with respect to government litigation, where government itself was facing litigation on whether they are eligible for certain exemptions, reverse charges, etc. or not.
So the next point is there's a new provision 148A which has been introduced, which talks about the government introduced track and trace mechanism. Now this is an interesting development. It is essentially to monitor specified commodities. So commodities are to be notified. So where there is this is essentially in areas where there is tax evasion, where they think that there is possible tax evasion, to track the movement of goods. So from the source till the final point of consumption, they want to track. So the areas which have been are being considered are essentially pan masala, gutka, tobacco, sand mining. These are areas, and you'll see that these are all loose, they're not packaged. It's in those circumstances where we find that there could be pilferage and tax avoidance. In UK, the UK HMRC also ran this similar track and trace program for tobacco, and India is also hoping to do something similar, but we're yet to see. We're going to be, this is just a nascent introduction in the law, but this is the aim of the tax authorities also, to garner revenues from sectors where there is possible tax avoidance. Yeah.
I think we can skip this excise.
I think we should keep it. We should just talk about it. Yeah. So, in the past, so this, we're coming to excise. I know excise is only has a limited applicability, but just so that, since we are discussing, there used to be a settlement commission in the law where, in case there was a dispute, you could go to the settlement commission, to the body, and say that we agree to pay the tax amount and the interest, and then you get a waiver from the penalty amount. Now, I think the settlement commission has become almost like a defunct body. There weren't many applicants going there, so so this is being disbanded, and there will be an interim board which will be constituted. But this is a proposal. Then this is on just fuel, that higher excise duty on unblended diesel has been deferred.
This is being deferred for many years now.
Excuse me, any update on the new excise bill?
No, nothing right now. No, we don't have any. Want to talk about that?
Yeah, so there have been retrospective amendments in the service tax laws also, wherein reinsurance services for weather-based crop insurance and modified national agriculture insurance scheme. In case of reinsurance services for these, the reinsurance services have been exempted retrospectively. For those of you who are dealing with the insurance industry, you would know that reinsurance was a big issue till couple of months back, wherein practically no one in the insurance industry was paying GST on the reinsurance, saying that the main insurer has already paid GST, so the reinsurance company does not need to pay GST. There was a huge investigation and litigation on this. Thereafter, in the 54th GST Council meeting, they clarified that reinsurance per se would not be taxable. They introduced amendments in the GST law also. On the similar lines, they have also probably there were disputes under the service tax law also, because the amendments which have been introduced in the service tax GST laws have also been extended to the service tax laws, and these reinsurance services for weather-based crop insurance and modified national agriculture insurance have been exempted retrospectively from 2011 till 2017, and there's a refund provision also for those who may have paid tax on this.
Okay, coming to customs. Customs, we are seeing that there are many changes which have been made. We still need to see more changes under customs, because this is an area where government really needs to apply its mind. We've had GST, which has been a huge improvement over service tax, excise, VAT, which was there. Customs so far has remain largely untouched. But this is also an area where we need to see reform. So now customs, there's a provisional assessment which time period which has been introduced of 2 years, 2 plus 1 year. We have many instances where assessments are pending. There was no timeline for completion of assessments. There were situations where even for 10 years these assessments are open. Now this again brings in uncertainty in doing business. I have situations and cases where the number or the volume of the provisional assessments actually exceed the turnover of a company because of the exposure that is there. You have to give bonds, bank guarantees at the time of doing provisional assessments, which leads to uncertainties. So here this has been introduced. Though normally in a normal circumstance, if you have assessment of goods, the time period has been reduced. Earlier it used to take a couple of weeks. And now it is down to a couple of days, but there are cases where matters when there is some investigation which is in process, goods are cleared on a provisional basis, and this is where we have this lacuna that the provisional assessment matters are just left unattended to. Their change of officers, and these matters just lie pending. Yeah, you want to add anything here? Okay. Then the next point is regarding voluntary revision of entry, bill of entry after clearance. So this is a provision that a importer can voluntarily revise their bill of entry after import. This is there could be a situation in India. We also have this concept of transfer pricing adjustment, or there could be even a situation where a importer is paying duties at a higher rate because to avoid a litigation, and there is a matter which has come out and you get a ruling, as a result of which you can probably go back to your past period and look at revising your bills of entry. So this is a provision which has been introduced that, because bills of entry are, submitted on a self-assessment basis. So this is allowing for that voluntary revision of your bills of entry, and you can within a period of 1 year from the date of payment claim a refund should the need arise, or you can if you require to pay additional, then you pay additional duty. But yeah, this allows for voluntary reassessment.
So this revision is not allowed only if there's an audit or investigation which has been initiated against the importer in the interim period. That's the only time when this revision is not allowed. Otherwise, you can go and pay the differential duty or claim a refund of the excess duty paid if the need arises.
So here, the next change is regarding, there are concessions which are there in the law. The customs law provides for certain concessions, and there are certain compliance requirements. So now for the compliance requirements, instead of making it monthly, it's now quarterly. So that's the compliance regarding use of the imported goods. then the time limit from 6 months has been extended to 1 year. That if you've imported the goods, this is to prevent, if it is to be, if there's a condition attached to the import of those concessional goods, that it's not traded, it is used for that specific purpose for which it is imported. So the time period within which you should consume it has been extended from 6 months to 1 year. Anything else? Yeah? No. Okay. So the customs tariff had 15 different slabs under which goods could be classified. The customs tariffs has 98 chapters, and within those 98 chapters there are subheadings and then sub-classifications. So it's a very vast, detailed document. It's exceptionally long, and it is divided into schedules, chapters. Now, and if you look at it, there were 15 different slabs. So any import that one looked at, one had to classify the goods as per the customs tariff and determine what is the appropriate classification, pay duty according to that classification. Now, there were 15 slabs. It has been brought down to 8 tariff slabs, which is still quite a few. Like if you look at GST, we just have 3 or 4 really, and we need to, but customs, it's an improvement definitely from 15, we are now down to 8. Then there has been concession which has been given to life-saving drugs, 36 life-saving drugs, and from basic customs duty. And there are also, they're both in 2 categories, exemption as well as some for concessional rate of duty. So they're in both categories. Also, to encourage manufacture in India of these drugs rather than importing it, there is a concessional duty exemption and concession to bulk drugs, so that these bulk drugs can then be formulated in disposable consumer size packaging. Social welfare surcharge has been exempted on 82 tariff line items. So and now what has happened is, though they have been exempted, there is a cess. So there is an agricultural and industry development cess, AIDC. So the cess has been increased in these products. So though the social welfare surcharge has been removed, the cess has been increased. So though it suggests that there's a exemption, but effectively it is the same.
Effectively, no, I think we can skip the rates.
Yeah, we'll just give you a highlight that there have been changes in the rates. Most of the rate changes have been more towards encouraging, say, the telecom sector, semiconductors, sustainability. So those areas, and for the if you look at the final item, which is the complete item, that those rates have been increased. So components, parts are being encouraged at a reduced rate, but the final product to import, those rates have been increased to deter imports of those final products. Then on motor vehicles also, considering that there was a lot of furor over how the rates in India were very high on motor vehicles, there have been concessions made in basic customs duty. But though these concessions have been made in basic customs duty, there have been increase in the surcharge and cesses. So net effect is the same as what it was before. So basic customs duty may have been brought down, but the cesses have been increased. So yeah. Then this. Yeah. I think here again, these are some areas where. These are some other, you can just glance at these to have an idea. So like these flat panel displays, they want to encourage manufacturing in India. So the rate has been enhanced from 10 to 20%. So there was a point of time when, we needed to import these display panels, but now display panels are being manufactured in India. So now to, encourage procurement domestically rather than importing, they've increased the duty. Yeah, this is it from indirect tax. Over to you, Divya and Nitin.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Ma'am, I have a query on this indirect tax part. So there was a Bombay High Court judgment on Mahindra and Mahindra matter, wherein it was held that interest will not be applicable if there was a shortfall in additional duties of customs. Right? This matter was also accepted by Supreme Court. So if we have paid some suo motu interest in certain bill of entries, can we revise those be under this revision scheme?
We'll discuss this after.
Sure.
Hello? Excuse me? Anupam madam, I have a question please. Hello? I have a question please. I am from GAIL India Limited, General Manager in GAIL India Limited. I have a question regarding suppose there is a sale of goods happening throughout the month to a customer, and at the time of sale of goods, discounts are not announced, and the discounts are announced at the end of the month or after the sale has happened. So in that case also, when credit note is being issued, then GST credit note can be issued or not?
So typically in such cases, whenever you are entering into a dealer agreement, you may not know the specific quantum of discount which will be provided, but typically most of the dealer agreements have a clause that discounts may be provided depending on the volume or different factors, year-end discounts at the year-end. So generally there's a residuary clause in the agreement which says that discounts may be provided based on the terms and conditions as may be agreed from time to time. So based on that, many companies take a position that discount is pre-agreed, even though the quantum was not pre-agreed, and hence it's eligible for, deduction under Section 15 of the CGST Act.
Sometimes what happened, even the discount is not decided before the sale of the goods.
Mostly it is not decided, but the tax authorities, the GST authorities want the discount to be specified upfront. But this is a dynamic aspect. The discount is based on market conditions. So you cannot define that upfront. And that is the point of dispute which is currently there. So there have been representations being made. And what taxpayers are saying is that we can outline the policy, but we can't define the specific percentage. So I can only share as this much with you that CBIC is looking at it. We are also actively discussing this with CBIC, with the GST policy wing, and highlighting this to them. They are aware of this issue, and very soon I believe there should be some clarity on this, because most taxpayers in a similar situation as yours, because you cannot define the percentage usually in most instances, but the tax authorities are coming to terms, understanding, they're having stakeholder discussions. So we're expecting some clarity on this.
But if there's no outline also, then it may be a problem.
May I request, maybe once we finish the personal tax session, then we can, take all the questions covering direct, indirect tax and personal tax, Thank you. Nitin? Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Saloni and Anupam. It was fairly insightful. Just like the finance minister's speech, the personal tax is also coming towards the latter part of the presentation. I'm sure people have heard and read a lot about the personal tax part, and I think it, of course, needs a bit of applaud from everyone in terms of what the finance minister has done. This slide is primarily covering, the rates that we are looking at in terms of changes that have happened. And mind you, it is important to note that all these changes that have happened are only in the new regime. So there is no tinkering or touching of the old regime. So old regime continues to remain the same. So these are rates of 24, 25 and the proposed rates. So as you see, between 3 to 4 lakhs, the basic exemption has been raised from 3 to 4 lakhs. So it's totally exempted up to 4 lakhs. And I'm sure people will have questions in their mind that what is it that, what is there in 12 lakh rupees and why are we talking about 3 to 4? So it is primarily up to 12 lakhs if you have an income and you are generating income up to 12 lakhs and you have nothing more than that. Then of course everything is totally exempted. So there is no taxability per se for that individual. But the moment you cross that number, there is a taxability that is likely to happen, and these rates are going to be applicable. But having said that, we have to bear in mind that there is certainly a benefit for anyone and everyone as part of this new regime and the changes that have been made in the tax structure. So while you see from 3 to 4 lakhs, it was earlier 5%, it's been made nil. So there is a saving of about 5,000 at that level. 4 to 7, the structure remains the same, so no particular saving in on a going forward basis. 7 to 8, that rate has changed. Earlier it was 10%, now it is 5%, which means that there is a saving of about 5,000 there. So if you see, there is also a separate column that we have created which talks about a cumulative saving, which is about 10,000 now. 8 to 10 lakhs, of course, it remains flat. 10 to 12, again the rate was higher earlier, it's gone down. So there is a saving of 10,000 and a cumulative one of 20,000. And 12,000 to 15,000 earlier was 20%, so it's 15% now proposed. Again, there is a saving of 15,000, cumulative 35,000. And this is where you see that there is a substantial change, because from 15 lakh onwards till 24 lakhs, where we were, in the slab of 30%, now that will sway between 15, 20 and 25. So which means that is the place where there is going to be a large amount of savings for everyone who files tax returns, and above, of course, 24 lakhs, the amount remains the same at 30%. So all in all, there is a substantial saving, a number of almost about 1,10,000 rupees for most of the people. And this is purely in the new regime. We have to bear that in mind. Now the question that arises is that what does this mean for the old regime? We have tried to cover some aspects on that in the subsequent slides. Then, as you would see, that there are no changes in the surcharge rates and cess, which is of course good news. One important point that we wanted to also highlight is that resident individuals will incur no tax on taxable income excluding specific special income up to 12 lakh rupees due to rebate under 87 capital A, an increase from the previous limit of 7 lakh rupees, which means from 7 it has gone to 12, so of course a benefit of about 5 lakh rupees. But what does this specific special income rates, just to pick up a simple example, if somebody has an income of about 12 lakh rupees and he's earning, let's say, a salary of about 9 lakh rupees, and he's got capital gains, let's say a short-term capital gain of about, because short-term is going to be taxed at a specific special rate of 20%. So 9 lakh will be exempted, and that 3 lakhs is going to be taxable at a special rate. So that factor has to be borne in mind, because that, of course, while the finance minister made that speech, it will not be visible in that, but while you read the fine print, this comes out very clearly. The rebate will not be available on such special taxing income such as capital gain, which I explained to you. Of course, we've already talked about the tax rate moving to 30%, from 30% down to 15, 20 and 25, and this gives you overall saving of 1.1 lakh. Standard deduction, there was a lot of contemplation before the budget came out that there is a likelihood that they might increase that, but that remains at 75,000 under the new regime and at 50,000 under the old regime. These are some statistics, some numbers. I think this will probably help you in terms of seeing where your income falls. We've taken some illustrative numbers of 12 lakhs, 13, 16, 24, 60, 1.5, 2.5 and 5, and we are seeing what is the benefit that overall happens. And if you see somebody earning an income of 12 lakh rupees now will save as good as about 80,200. Anybody at 13 lakh is saving about 26,000. 16 lakhs is about 52,000. At the earliest, 12 lakh number is going to be, of course, higher, because suddenly there is a movement from 7 lakh to 12 lakhs. So of course, the number is going to be higher at 83,200. At 24 is about 1,14,400. 60 lakhs is about 125,840, so on and so forth. So this is, if you see, there is a substantial saving that is coming out of this. Now, there is, and if we actually look at statistics which came out before the budget was released, there is a population of about 70% of people which is actually now going into the new regime, which is actually great. And while the new regime had been introduced, we had seen people were not moving into the new regime. But yes, with these changes happening, there is a likelihood that that 70% number is going to go much higher, because there is a huge bit of saving. But then in the next slide, we'll sort of just talk about where the break-even point is from a old regime and new regime perspective. Of course, that's not laid out in the bill. We've tried to just look at numbers and put some illustrations which can be useful. So yes, comparison is presented about current default tax regime rates in relation to proposed rates, including applicable surcharge and taxable income is after standard deduction of 75,000. So this number that we've taken is post the standard deduction. Now this is a useful slide. I think this, I would leave 15 seconds with you to understand and see where we stand, and we've taken some illustrative numbers. So as you would see, there is a large amount of income under the new regime. So what we've done is that we've taken tax under the new regime, which is existing, which is as of today, and then we have taken tax under the new regime, which is proposed. And then we have also done some calculation in terms of what is the tax that's going to be there under the old regime. So if you see, with an income of 7 lakh rupees, of course it is beneficial to go into the new scheme. With 12 lakh rupees, again we are seeing that the tax as per existing provisions is about 83,200. Under the proposed number, it is going to be nil. And in the old regime, it is 179,400, which means there is an overall saving of almost about 1,80,000 rupees if somebody was in the old regime. 13 lakh rupees, again 1,04,000, and then the proposed number is about 78,000, and then old regime is substantially higher. So as you see that most of the places, there is the new regime which is coming out as beneficial, even up to about 60 lakh of rupees. And we can continue with numbers, but this is just an illustration for you, which probably will give an understanding of where we stand. Now, what does this mean? And if you see the lower part of the slide, we've talked about break-even points. So what are these break-even points? Break-even points are primarily situations where people are invested heavily, and I'm sure most of the people sitting in the room would have invested sometime or the other under ATC. There will be contribution they will be making for their family from a medical insurance perspective. They will be making contribution towards their senior citizen parents, which gives you an additional saving of about 50,000. So just look at a simple number of 150 from a ATC perspective, about 75,000 from ATD. Let's assume you've got NPS also, which is about 50,000. LTA benefit, which large part of the population also avails, which is not there under the new regime. And then of course there can be loss under the head income from house property, which is, let's say, about 2 lakh rupees. So that again, if you add up all these numbers, it's a huge sum, which is about 5 to 6 lakh rupees. One factor that I have not talked about is an HRA. Now, if people are claiming HRAs and they want to claim an exemption for that, that is not available under the new regime. So if you add up the HRA portion and let's say 5-6 lakh rupees of ATC, ATD, loss under the head income from house property and all, then we probably might have a situation where the old regime probably is better, because those deductions will offset that. And the intention, of course, getting the new regime is to, and introducing all these new slabs and reducing the numbers is primarily to offset the benefits that are being available under the old regime. Now the question that arises is that, is the old regime going to continue or not? I don't have an answer to that. There may be situations where probably the government is thinking that they might come out with a sunset clause over a period of time, but with large part of the nation heavily invested on ATCs, and of course 99% of the population is there under ATD, I'm sure it is not easy to do that. So just to make it clear and understandable, at 14 lakh rupees, if you are having a deduction or an exemption under HRA and ATC, ATD of about 5,68,750 and above that, then it is better to go into the old regime. If your income about 20 lakhs and you have deductions and exemptions of about 7.58, then it is better to, on more than that, it is better to go into the new regime, and so on and so forth. So 850, of course, is a magical number where you sort of going ahead and investing into various things and claiming an HRA. So I think that's again, you'll have to go back onto the drawing board, understand what works for you. From the finance minister's speech and also internal calculations done by us, we are seeing that there is a huge part of the population that will fall under the new regime. So we have to see with passage of time how this works out. So yes, this is of course a calculation which you'll have to do at your end and understand because you'll have to make a disclosure before the employer that what regime are you looking at. Otherwise, they will take the new regime as the default regime because that's the law of the land. These are some changes that have been done which are more elementary in nature. One is on the self-occupied property. They've actually made it simpler in terms of the definition, and what they're doing is that if you go into a self-occupied property definition, it says if you're currently where a self-occupied property cannot be occupied because of the fact that you are doing a business and profession at some place, or you got an employment, let's say somebody has a house in Gurgaon and he works out of Delhi. So there is a situation where he would probably not occupy that house. So you have to give the condition. Now these conditions have been removed. It can be any reason. It can be any reason why you're not occupying a house in Gurgaon and working in Delhi. And both those houses are going to be available for the purposes of exemption. So they removed that condition of due to his employment, business or profession carried on at any other place, and they have replaced it for any reason.
So that means HRA exemption can be considered even if I have a self-occupied property in the same city. And I do go for rent or another, so I can claim the HRA exemption.
Should be available. And but again, then you have to bear in mind that if you are taking an HRA, then you are going into the old regime. Yeah. Okay, the next one is a very elementary one, and I don't want to sort of get into much into it because this is still not notified. These are some, when Divya mentioned that the new bill is going to be is being proposed very soon in the next few days. I think this probably will be captured there because this is for some benefits being provided free of cost or at a concessional rate, taxable for employee earning annual monetary salary more than INR 50,000. And then again, there's a limit of 2 lakh rupees for any medical treatment. These limits are now going to be changed primarily for calculation of all these factors. I think this will be notified soon. So we are looking at the bill to come out and maybe it's captured over there. I think this last provision is a very useful one for people who got children studying overseas and doing their education across the globe. This has been so if you remember, there was an introduction of a TCS benefit in the previous budget, which said that if you got TCS, and I'm just telling this thing from a perspective so that people can absorb it better. People in the past who are employees, and if they've been getting, they've been sending, let's say they've been paying some money overseas and remitting money overseas for whatever purposes, there was of course a tax, there's a TCS above 7 lakh rupees. However, if you've taken an education loan, then of course there is only a very minimal 0.5% that's applicable. What they've done now, and that TCS, the issue was that let's say somebody is sending 25 lakh rupees, of course that's above 7 lakh rupees, no education loan taken but for education purposes, then 5% is applicable. The question is that you have to file a tax return, claim a refund, so on and so forth. Every quarter the government issues a traces statement which you can submit to the employer, and the employer will be able to claim that benefit against your TDS, so therefore that can be offset. No need to wait for the final tax return to be filed. So that was a welcome move. What they've done is that this year they have made it more dearer. They have increased the limit from 7 to 10 lakh rupees. That's one thing. Secondly, if you have taken a loan for this purposes, then there is going to be no TCS at all. So this is a very, very good and a welcome move. But I think they are making things simpler, which of course is understandable and good for the population at large. I will pause here and thanks so much for hearing me out.
I think we are happy to take the questions on the corporate tax, indirect tax, or personal taxes.
Sir, myself from NTPC Alok. My question is regarding input service distribution. The provision requires distribution of input tax in respect of services received for other units. And this provision is only for distribution of input tax, and this distribution has to be made based on the turnover in the state of operating plants. But in case of NTPC, we have some tariff guideline, and we have to distribute the cost also on the basis of installed capacity. So whether there is any requirement in GST Act to distribute the ITC, this distribution of ITC in books also in the proportion of turnover in the state, or we can go with two lines, one for GST compliance and one for books compliance. Because I have gone through the law.
Both can be done.
Both can be done. No?
Both can be.
GST law would specify only for the purpose of GST law. It cannot tell you what entries have
But
to be
it
put
does
in the
not
books.
specify for books, transfer of credit in the books. So we can opt for different books, accounting in books, and different accounting for taxation. Is it permissible?
It is permissible, but then it would create issues at the time of filing your 9C, wherein you would have to reconcile your books with the returns. That is the time when you will have to give this explanation in the comments to GST and 9C, when your state-wise books of accounts may not reconcile with the GST returns filed in the state.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. One more question, ma'am. This SWS, social welfare cess, which is applicable on custom duty, but whether this concept is also similar for in case of AIDC, agriculture infrastructure development cess, whether it is applicable on assessable value, and how it is applicable, if it is so, how it is applicable on assessable value.
Yeah, so there is a calculation methodology. AIDC will apply on the composite of basic customs duty and social welfare surcharge. So it will be calculated not directly on assessable. So the assessable value will be your cost, insurance and freight, CIF plus 1% loading handling charges. So CIF plus 1% becomes your assessable value, then your basic customs duty, then on top of that social welfare surcharge, and then on top of that is AITC.
But now post amendment, cess and surcharge won't be levied on the same goods, so that would be simplified to that extent.
So you can go ahead, yeah. Praveen, just give him the mic. Sir, can you use the mic? Sir.
Yes, I'm Shashikant from MMTC. My question is on personal tax. If a person has no active income other than short-term capital gain and long-term capital gain, in such cases, what are the basic exemption limit for STCG and LTCG with respect to the old regime and new regime?
You want me to display that slide?
Just we will need actually it's because I cannot remember that offhand. Do you have something written? We need that. Just give us 2 minutes, we'll explain that. We can take the other question in the meantime. Nikal do na.
I mean, you wanted to ask a question, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question on corporate tax. Yeah, so there is a change in SCP provisions, and what has been clarified that purchase of goods in India for the purpose of export will not be considered as a SCP. So there has been a debate on the purchase of goods from outside India and traditional imports, so we call it. So by making an explanation in this, excluding purchase of goods in India, does that mean that purchase of goods from outside India, a limit of 2 crore, which is already there? So though there is no profit attribution rule till date, but
should we understand that yes, traditional import will also be considered as SCP for this purpose? And can you just also explain what's the genesis of this explanation which they have mentioned here? Yeah, thank you.
Like you mentioned, SCP is only for the non-residents, which they have a business connection in India. So there was a lot of license offices which were saying that we are in India only for the purpose of importing. We just only want to do purchase from India, and ultimately we want to come to India and have a setup or a small setups where we can purchase all these goods. We should not create a SCP for us because we are not actually doing any business in India. We are coming and setting up our entity or a branch in India because we want to do some purchase of the goods. So now they have just extended and clarified it, because once you have a setup, a center for it, where you are purchasing the goods from India and then exporting it outside India, it's ideally should not create, because they are those incomes they are not receiving from person in India, because genesis of any attribution is ultimately for the purpose of if that income is generating from India, or if that income has some source or some basis or some assets which is in India. However, in this case, once you are coming and exporting those goods outside India, it would be outside the SAP transaction. Because now the SAP is going towards a digitalization, and more digital PEs are also coming under this category. That's really the genesis, because there could be a situation where actually the transaction may be happening outside India also. So for example, for the large groups who have the portals who are sitting outside India, and they are doing just those purchase transactions and not really for the purpose of doing business in India, but they have been doing because of the large groups having multiple entities spread across the borders, and then they have a centralized centers. So that could be another reason why the government has been out this exemption.
So my concern was that how can a purchase of goods in India, by the non-resident, be considered as a SCP? It goes against so they clarify this through law. An explanation has been added, but was it considered as deemed to accrualize in India at the first place?
So it was not actually deemed to accrualize, but there was a confusion because of SCP when came into the picture.
So SCP, when they announced, that was for the digital transaction. The time, I guess in 2018. So that time they mentioned in this speech that it's going to attract the digital business.
Right.
But later on they specified the limit, and 2 crore limit is for everyone.
Right.
So still that's a debate whether it's for the digital or non-digital as well. But going by this logic, and it looks like that they have understood this concept. Now they say, okay, every kind of purchase from outside India, if it crosses the threshold, it would be deemed to be SCP. And when it talks about the purchase of goods in India for the purpose of export, will not be considered. Yes. So as an industry, we still feel that
there was no need of this,
yes,
right?
Yes, I do.
So it just looks like more of clarificatory in the nature, and not really, because industry was always of the position that this is not even subject to tax. This is more a clarification which has come.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just take that question.
Hello. Yeah.
Sir from MMTC.
Who has the question?
We're just answering that earlier question.
Yeah. So sir from MMTC, he asked that question.
So my understanding is that you are checking if I don't have any other income other than, say I don't have any salary income, I just have SCG or LTCG. So can I adjust that income against my basic exemption limit? And what, sorry?
Any exemption limit applicable for STCG and LTCG when there is no salary income or no active income.
Sahil, please use the mic. You need to switch it on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for LTCG, there is an exemption limit of 1.25 lakhs, which you can use in case you've sold equity shares. And after that, even if you have something left, then you can use it against the basic exemption limit. So under the old regime, it is currently 2.5 lakhs. And under the proposed new regime, it is 4 lakhs. So taking examples, say if you have LTCG of 3 lakhs and you don't have any other income, then you can adjust it against the basic exemption limit.
Yeah, you wanted to ask. Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Good afternoon. I am Anil Chaubey from Bharat Electronics. My question is regarding GST. We have a regular GST registration in Delhi, which is also used for billing purposes wherever for other units. We are a multi-location unit. For other units are also using this GST registration wherever permanent establishment is required for billing to Delhi customer. The same registration we are also using for common expenses like hotel expenses for other units who are coming here, where it is CGST and SGST, and that expenditure we are transferring, and credit also, ITC also we are transferring through invoicing and credit notes to other units. Now post April, 1st April 2025, can we continue doing that, or for ISD purpose, for common services or services of other units, we have to take separate registration, ISD registration?
You can take that, you can take that.
So we have to understand what is the activity being carried out from the other registrations. For instance, if the other registrations are only BD offices, there is no other outward supply being provided.
No, outward supply is also provided from this GST registration. Wherever for other units, they are using this as from this registration only. Wherever permanent, this is also being used as permanent establishment for certain transactions towards customers. So billing is also being, outward supply is also being done.
So presently, are you cross-charging from those other locations to the?
Yes,
so in this case, if you will do ISD, then it will be like a circle, because you will distribute the credit by way of ISD to different offices, and then they will eventually have to cross-charge that.
No, we have to separate both the registration, because regular registration is required, because billing will be required to be done. For common services and services for other units, do we have to take separate registration for ISD?
So separate IC registration would be required only for that registration which is receiving services which are common for more than one unit. So if let's say those branch offices are not receiving any services which are pertaining to more than one office, then ISD registration is not required for those branch offices.
Both things are being done. We are receiving services for other units also. Input ITC is also coming, and from billing is also being done from this unit.
So all is happening from one unit, which is Delhi.
Which is Delhi registration.
Which is Delhi registration. Yeah. So Delhi has your main registration and you have an ISD registration.
Main registration, it is one registration.
One registration, one regular.
Main registration is Bangalore.
Achha, main registration is Bangalore.
We have registration in almost all the states.
Okay. So you have one registration in Delhi, and you said that there is an ISD registration. You have obtained that ISD?
No, we have not taken yet.
Okay, you have not taken. And you're doing common services procurement in Delhi or Bangalore? Bangalore. Delhi.
Some things are coming to Delhi, like hotel or other units, they are coming to Delhi. Those people are coming to Delhi and utilizing hotel accommodation. That CG.
I'm not sure whether hotel specifically is like a common service.
Oh, sir, they are purchasing something here over the counter for this thing.
I think hotel is a little different. You know, when you look at hotel, it's typically a telecom service, an audit service, a legal service. Those are the ones which are larger. Hotel is very specific to a particular person's use.
Other services also there.
Yes. Yes. So the other services, then you should procure them in the ISD registration.
Okay.
And then distribute it to the various locations as per the formula prescribed. Right?
But then they don't have any outward supply from other registrations, so it will eventually lead to cross-charge.
Okay, you don't have outward supply in the other locations?
We do have.
They do have.
If you have outward supply, then you will have to distribute the credit by way of ISD from the registration which receives common expenses. So you will have to change your GSTIN for receiving input services. You will have to give your ISD GST. All the credits would come on that, and then applying the formula, which is the turnover for the previous financial year, you will have to distribute that credit to different states.
Okay, ma'am.
I think there was a question at the back. Just hold on, please.
I have a question on ISD only. So that's
please go ahead.
Just to this, can a regular GST and taxpayer raise a invoice to ISD unit for other than ASEAN cases, where they procured the common services, but now they, instead of doing cross charge, just making, what I think that ISD is an office of supply who can take the bills from the third parties for further distribution. Can it take this bill from the normal registered taxpayer of same company, which is a regular registered taxpayer?
So I haven't come across that. There was an amendment in 2018.
I would say yes, if you go with the provisions of tax invoicing and you see the ISD document, what invoice they can contain mention, then it has a reference of registered taxpayer, regular registered taxpayers details.
So
it creates a confusion.
Yeah, so in 2018 there was an amendment, January 2018 there was an amendment which clarified that credit can be transferred from a regular registration to the ISD registration for the purpose of further distribution.
So now the question is, what about then cross charge that way? Let's suppose I take a bill and the same bill I do raise to my ISD and then ISD further distribute the same to this. Then where is the question of cross charge then?
Ideally, it should be cross charge for internal services and ISD for third party services.
Ideally,
That's how it needs to be bifurcated between
internally generated services are to be cross-charged, third party to be ISD, but what expense is common or not, that is a detailed analysis. So you will have to go at ledger item wise, and ledger wise you will have to see which expense is common and which is pertaining only to one branch office, and that way you will have to take a call on what has to be cross-charged and what is pertaining only to what has to be distributed by way of ISD, what forms part of expenses for this particular office which is further providing internally generated services to other offices. For instance, there may be cases that you're providing marketing support services to other branch office and you may be incurring certain expenses. So those expenses may be for this office only which are further to be cross-charged. So there are various baskets of expenses in which your expense ledger has to be distributed, and accordingly a call has to be taken on whether ISD or cross-charge. Largely all third-party expenses are ISD, but if they're pertaining to your activities, then it may not be ISD and eventually output may be cross-charge.
So if I forgot to take the services in the ISD registration, I take it in the normal registration, though it pertains to more than one offices. So what law is not stopping me to raise this invoice from normal registration to ISD and then further distributing this?
As of now, no, but before probably April 1, they may do some tweaking also. But I understand that yes, CBIC at the back end is working on finalizing the modality, so you may expect to.
Okay.
Probably they may, I feel that they may amend this also. Right now, you are right.
Yes, principally should not happen, but
yes.
People are doing this, so I know that.
Right now it is permissible. Probably in future they will have to amend this to if they wanted to stop. But you are right. Presently it can be done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I have a question from Salvi. So, as you have told that evergreening of tax losses have been stopped from this finance bill. So, what could be the genesis of this? Because in one hand, government is promoting all amalgamations and restructuring through IBC mode, and that law is very aggressive. So, why this has come in?
So government is promoting the tax certainty at some point, but at the same time, government also does not want to lose or start giving freebies again. So if there is a business loss which is available to any business for 8 years, why that should be changed if there is a amalgamation happening? So they don't want to just keep up that fresh lease coming up, otherwise you will see M&A happening only for the purpose of utilization of those losses. So that looks like genesis because they want to streamline it, that you are amalgamated or not amalgamated. If the business losses were supposed to be only for 8 years, it will be only for the 8 years. The interesting point is, though they're saying it's a prospective amendment, the question is coming up, what is happening to the cases who have done this before? Will it open the plethora of litigation or not? That is something to be seen yet.
All right, thank you.
Any other question that we have?
There was a question on the customs which was asked. So I just checked there are certain modes. Obviously your question was whether refund can be claimed because Supreme Court held that upholding the decision of Bombay High Court that interest cannot be paid on additional customs duty because there's no provision and there's a provision in the law. Yes, and there's a provision only for levying interest on the basic customs duty. So there have been a couple of judgments after that also. So recently also, I think this month, January also, there was a tribunal decision wherein it held that interest is payable. So there have been a couple of contrary tribunal judgments also on this issue.
and I think the matter will eventually go to the larger bench. So based on the facts, while in principle you can say that since there's no charging provision, you can claim your refund, but then there have been tribunal decisions that say that if on domestic transactions you forget to pay IGST, then still interest is payable. So why not on import? Because if ideally customs duty is levied, interest is levied on delayed payment of customs duty, then it should be levied on delayed payment of IGST also, which is paid as part of customs duty. So there have been contrary views recently also. If required, you can share your email ID. I'll share those judgments also. So the position is still evolving. While principally you can still say that, based on the Supreme Court decision, I can go and take a refund under Section 27 of the Customs Act, but position is still evolving because there have been contrary tribunal rulings also on this issue.
So my question was, one way is to go about is to file a refund claim, and second way to go about is can we file a revised bill of entry and claim that interest will not be applicable because of the Supreme Court ruling?
Well, you can obviously explore the possibility of filing the revised bill of entry, but then it would be picked up for assessment clearly because there have been tribunal rulings also on this issue.
Thank you. There is also one question on IST fund. So if I'm getting third-party services, I can definitely distribute it to my IST recipient. What about if I'm consuming certain goods? The head office or the corporate office is consuming goods and availing ITC, and the head office is working as an office of the supplier. So do I need to mandatorily cross-charge?
It's only for services, not for goods.
No, services can only be distributed. But if I'm availing ITC on the goods and I'm consuming those goods as a corporate offices, and definitely I'm working for all my offices in different states.
Yeah.
Do I need to mandatorily cross-charge for the ITC that are availed on goods?
So can you give me an example, if you can just elaborate?
Laptops used by the MD, CEO,
Yes,
etc.
Yeah.
Laptops printed.
And you are transferring those laptops, say, to other locations?
No, we are not transferring those laptops. We are using those laptops in a corporate office.
Yeah.
The issue is, do I need to cross-charge for the component or the value of those laptops to my recipient offices?
Okay. I haven't come across this, but it's an interesting. Have you looked at this issue?
So we'll have to see whether the management function provided by the head office to the branch office, whether it will be taking a position, it's a stewardship activity, or it is a support service provided by one office to another. Because with respect to employee salary, they clearly clarified that that is outside. But will you be required to cross charge only because there are certain inputs which are being procured, which are commonly eventually used for the whole company? That is still being debated. So
because when we are distributing for services, that call we have already taken, that this corporate office is working for the units.
So if you are, typically what happens is, even when you're distributing for the cross-charge for services, that service element, there is a cost to determine what is the service. It will, in my opinion, I feel that it should include also the cost of goods. Whatever the service, whatever you're consuming while providing that service, it's not pure play services, it is the entire cost. And therefore, I would think that this would get subsumed within that management cost. But again, like what Anupama said, are you cross-charging those management services? You may
after this IST has been made mandatory, there is no need for cross-charging.
No, cross-charge provisions continue to exist. So
only for the internally generated services, right?
So the question is whether the CEO, MD of the company is providing internally generated services or management functions to the other branch office. That is a call which has to be taken.
So if you have like HR services or whatever, the managerial, maybe there's a supply chain head, are those services being cross-charged? Because those services are being received by other locations as well. And how are you determining the value of those services?
There's another point of view also that HR is HR of the company, MD is MD of the company, so there's no need to cross-charge also. I'm just putting in both the perspectives that it is still debatable, and even internally as part of the Center of Excellence, we are also debating these topics on a daily basis. But these calls have to be taken on each situation and each expense. So basically, that's why we're telling everyone that each expense, including these expenses like laptops, computers, have to be discussed at ledger item wise to see what is the end use, and based on that you have to take a call whether to cross charge, IST, or do what. But cross charge is clearly not done away with.
Sure.
Sorry.
Also, so you need to raise an invoice for them, invoice to them. In that case, automatically that inputs we can transfer.
Yes, so that is a cause.
They did not insist on that. We are, as of now, we are not charging, we are not raising any debit note or invoice on, but they were telling that you should raise.
It must be state GST authorities, Karnataka or some.
Yes, Delhi GST.
Delhi or Karnataka GST authorities. They are the most active ones taking these positions. But this issue is under consideration, and you have to see whether you're cross charging and whether you want to change the position post implementation of ISD or not, because presently you're not cross charging for the management functions provided by the HO. Whether you want to change that position post implementation of ISD is also something you have to see.
I think that will be better. Then we need not go for ISD, and everything will be doing through this channel only.
No, but ISD still has to be done. Everything cannot go through cross charging.
Both.
Yeah.
You have to follow both mechanisms.
ISD registration can we take on one plan more than one? More than
More than one. You can have more than one ISD for different locations.
Okay.
Thank you, madam. Circular, they have clarified that employee cost will not be considered.
Exactly.
Now the question is, when the services by an employee to the employee by itself has been excluded from the levy, then the valuation they are saying, okay, salary will be excluded. What about the main service which is already excluded under schedule?
How do you value the value of service provided by the MD to the company per se?
No, that is second, but when the schedule 1 entry itself says that
employee, yes.
And employer is not one state, employer is the entire company. So does they think even if the service by an employee to employee has been excluded under schedule 1, but still they are assuming only the salary portion for the valuation they would exclude. Now the question is primarily the activity itself, whether that is so the argument of MD services and other services by employee to IOC or other companies. So that is still, I would say, even after IC provisions, that matter will still continue.
Yes. It continues because, and what is it that has changed in the law that you change your position prospectively from 1st April? IC related provisions have changed, but that's for third party expense. Internally generated, if you're changing the position, then you also have to be mindful for the past because the provisions regarding cross charge between distinct persons are not undergoing any change, at least as of now. They haven't changed.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a question from Nitin. So, as there is amendment in respect of socio-economic welfare for valuation of perquisites. So, though you have already told that we can expect something in a new bill, but as your personal experience, would you foresee? Do you expect any positive insight, positive thing from salary perspective? Is there any positive upward revision on perquisite valuations?
Not really. This is only just one particular clause that they are looking at. I don't think so. There is going to be a huge. Whatever they have to give, they have already given now. Okay. I think next few years we'll have to be satisfied with that.
Just one thing I want to add: when we look at that provision, that value of any benefits provided for two employees, which is taxable, beyond where the income is of this employee is more than 50,000, or if it is 2 lakh for overseas. See, those limits are going to be revised upwards. That is the thought process. So if they get revised upward, then there will be some benefit definitely. Yes. But I think once till the time we see what comes out, it is anyone's guess. But if it is revised upward, that is what the intention looks like, because they were fixed almost more than two decades back.
Yes.
So it's possible
that they get in 2001.
Right. Yeah. And some in earlier than that also.
Yes.
So if you were look at that, then there could be some benefit for those categories. Yeah.
Sir, one dilemma in this regard. Our payroll, what it will do for TDS purpose? Because earlier, if it is more than 50,000, we were including in taxable income for TDS purposes. Now payroll, what it will do?
No, I am sure before that they would get they'll notify that.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Because this is effective from April, so we still have time for that. Yeah.
I have one query on corporate tax. So basically we have discussed the SCP provisions and the amendment they have brought in. But I just wanted to hear your take. What's your view if you are simply importing physical goods from outside India, right? The sale transaction is getting concluded outside India, but still as per the extant provision, it will be deemed that the exporter will be having a business connection in India, right? And so whether it's the intention of the government to tax such transaction where the sale has already been concluded outside India and the exporter really is not doing any transaction in India?
So the honest answer is yes, because government is clearly saying if you are making sale to India and how you conclude, because earlier there was a lot of decisions of Supreme Court, there was no reason of getting this SAP into the picture. We had Ishu Rama and all those decisions which said if title has been passed outside India, that does not mean there should be any taxability which comes to India. But now since SAP provision has come, that's why the entire litigation has started, and government intention is very clear, because considering the size of our economy, if we are growing at the size and the speed, and we are going to be one of more consumption-oriented economy as well, then why should not those exporter pay taxes in India? And therefore, they have put in those limits as well, number of users, how much is the number of transactions you are doing. So if it's a one-off or small transaction, you are out. But if it's not, then yes, you are taxable under the domestic law. But anyways, all of those exporter also is protected by treaty. So what government wants to say that I want to have this source of right in India with us, but you can go ahead and take your treaty exemptions, which means that all those exporters are anyways outside the legislation if they don't have a PE in India. So domestic taxation, yes, the right is with India to tax them, but under the treaty they will continue to get those exemptions if they don't have a PE.
So to substantiate the treaty claim, we need to collect documentation for physical exporters?
Yes. For all offshore supply, we are saying, so earlier we used to say you only get it no PE certifications, but now we are also saying that you get a confirmation from them there is no SAP in India. If there is an SAP in India, because I can't determine what is the turnover of that, then you give me a clarification or TRCs or Form 10F that you won't be subject to India because of the treaty benefits.
I have one more question. I'll put an example. Suppose a company is selling a particular material across India through a dealer network and consignment stockist. And in one case, Himachal Pradesh government has introduced a AGT, additional goods tax, which is payable by the buyer of the goods in the state. Somebody who is buying a material, suppose a company who sells that material directly, if it sells from X basis to that customer, then that buyer is liable to pay that tax, register and pay that tax. But suppose my dealer who is maintaining my warehouse in that state, I transfer stock transfer material for that goods, and then IGST obviously is payable on that stock transfer invoice. And so since from the GST Act point of view, my dealer becomes the buyer, so he will have to register and pay the AGT tax to the Himachal government. Now suppose when he again sells the material to some customer, so he is becoming out of pocket. So suppose I increased my stock point price by that amount, AGT amount, then and pay GST on that AGT amount also, that on total amount, and later I want to reimburse that AGT amount to that dealer. So whether that reimbursement will be subject to GST or not?
Sir, I wanted to ask a question. You mentioned that this tax, this Himachal tax, I'm not very familiar with it, but you said that it is on the buyer of the goods. When you're doing a stock transfer, there is no, it's only for GST purposes that this is a supply. Okay, so your stockist, I'm not clear why he is paying this tax, because he's not buying. Is he buying it? Is he making a purchase, or is it your internal warehouse?
Basically, it is the warehouse owned or hired by the dealer.
So it's a dealer, it's a third party who is stocking.
A stock transfer is being made and the GST of a dealer is being used.
Okay, so then it is not the same.
Actually, he is not buying.
He is not buying.
Ownership remains with the company.
Ownership remains with the company. Okay. Yeah. So is he just providing, stocking services in that sense? Yes.
And for that, whatever he sells, either exports or from the stockment, we are paying some commission. For that service, we are paying some commission.
Yeah, it's like a consignment.
So Schedule 1 says transaction between principal and the agent qualifies to be a supply. So since he is a agent, he's selling. So, but still GST would be payable on supply from the principal to the agent.
No, that is being paid. Whatever invoice during the stock transfer is being done, GST is being paid on that. But
since he is depositing say 500 rupees per ton of AGT to the HP government. Now I want to reimburse him, and I have to also recover from the ultimate buyer who is the purchaser. So suppose I increase the stock point price by 500 rupees, and then also pay GST on that 500 rupees also, and subsequently want to reimburse that, suppose he submits the voucher of the tax, EGT tax paid, and suppose I reimburse him, so will that be treated as a service? Because it should not be treated as a service.
He must be raising an invoice for the commission also on you separately.
Separately.
So he will not include this as an out-of-pocket expense or a pure agent expense in that.
He will probably simply submit some voucher kind of, and along with the tax deposit proof, AGT proof.
And that tax deposit will be in your name or in his name?
In his name, because he has registered
so
for
then
it.
he will have to include the value also for instance he is charging 100 rupees as a commission and he is paying 10 rupees as that expense, that charge that he used to pay in Himachal. So then he will charge GST on 110.
If it is treated as a service, then probably definitely IGST will have to be paid. But whether it will be paid as a service or he simply reimbursement.
Can't he be treated for the payment of taxes on?
But the invoice for the tax payment is not in his name, it's in the name of the agent. So for pure agent, the expense he should only be paying it, but the invoice should be raised in his name.
The liability of paying tax should come on the actual goods.
Technically the bill should be.
Because whosoever is maintaining the warehouse, he has to pay.
I would actually ask you to just relook at this, because when you are saying it is the buyer needs to pay, the stockist is
from
not the
GST
buyer.
point of view, probably he becomes buyer, na?
GST, yes, but from the Himachal tax perspective,
contractually also he is not the buyer.
He is not a buyer. But I don't know what the taxable event is for the
We have to look
Himachal
at
tax.
the documents.
Yeah.
We have to look at the document through which he is paying this tax, and basis that will be determined whether he is acting as a pure agent or he is incurring these expenses as an out-of-pocket expenses which
It's
have
an
to
out
be.
of pocket.
If it's out of pocket, then clearly it has to be included in the value of service for paying GST. He'll charge GST on 110, IGST on 110. But if it's pure agent, then this can be excluded.
This is something you can pick offline and
share
see
the
the agreements, what documents are there, what agreements are there, and then see what is the position to be adopted, if there is any planning avenue or if there is something which needs to be taken up.
We can share our visiting cards and probably you can share the document with us.
Even otherwise, under the GST, post GST, there can't be any tax on the sale or purchase other than GST. So it is in the nature of toll.
Some local levy. Yeah, I was also wondering what is this, because you're not allowed under the constitution to levy. any
Probably they
other-
should not levy. I don't know they have levied it.
Whether it can be challenged also constitutionally, whether the government is. Yeah.
And toll also should be in the name of the person who owns the goods, not the person who is bringing the goods in the state. So.
But toll is basically on the this vehicle who is carrying. Basically, they are supposed to pay. It's not the buyer or the, even in case of stock transfer or the sale purchase transaction, toll is applicable based on the movement of goods.
Toll is different. Toll
is different, but tax is different.
Yeah. So any more queries?
I have one query. In the last budget, in Customs Act, they introduced one section 65A. So if you are importing goods on the mover, you will have to pay IGST. But the effective date has not yet been notified.
Yes.
So whether the government is rethinking about those provisions or?
Yes, there's been a lot of representation on this, not to introduce this. So the government is going slow because of the representation. So for the time being, you can consider until it gets notified, it is not there. But for, there's. So I think, yes ma'am.
Shelby, I understand there is a tax clarity on AIS. It would be treated as a capital gain.
So could you just help me understand from an investor point of view, what do you think would be the implications?
So you're talking about the long-term capital gains where they have been included as a part of the category 3? We can discuss, because there are a couple of amendments which has come, and it is largely to streamline, because earlier there was a miss which has happened for 112A for long-term capital gains for specific categories.
I understand earlier there was an ambiguity if it can be treated as a business income But maybe some clarification was there, now it is to be treated as a capital gain for alternate investment funds.
Oh, yes. So the definition of the capital asset has been extended now. So earlier, so carried interest, which were largely earned by these AIFs at the time of closure of the trust, were issued whether that were towards my capital gain or whether there could be a business income. But they have always units, and there was carried interest which are coming at the units at the end of the closure of the trust. So that there has been clarity.
Okay, so how does it affect the investors as such?
So it's a beneficial move because there was a lot of litigation. So, for example, earlier when they were saying if I'm selling my unit, I'm getting a capital gain. But at the same time, when that entire trust is closing down, whatever carried interest which comes is also my capital right. So I should also have it as a capital gain income and not really as a business income. Business income for these AIFs and all is charged at a maximum margin rate, which is 30% plus. However, the capital gains will again be a lower rate.
Okay.
So that's a big difference.
Thank you.
So with this, we come to the end of the session, and we thank the panelists for their patience, for dealing with the queries, and for giving us such an insightful thoughts to carry back with us. I'm sure all of us would be more enriched with knowledge, and they are still here in case you have some queries. You can always catch them offline and discuss your queries. So with this, we come to the end of the budget session today, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, panelists, for being with us and enlightening us. And thank you till we meet again. Have a great day. So just one announcement before we disperse. Please join us for lunch at the banquet outside. So, and we also request you to join us for lunch. So thank you so much.